Chapter 61. Excitement Before the Journey. After Thorin finished speaking, Balin nodded and produced 5 thick sheaves of parchment from his wide, deep red coat. He smiled and said, "These are standard formalities, expenses, duration of the contract, pay, funeral provisions, and so on." Bilbo's relaxed face tightened when he heard the last word. Balin handed one sheaf to him and distributed the others to Tarnans and his companions. Tarnas skimmed his contract, saw nothing amiss, and signed quickly. Millicent and Egon followed suit without much fuss after Tarns put his name down. Bernal glanced through his copy, was soon daunted by the dense runes and clauses of a dwarvish contract, and signed as well. Bilbo, however, read every line. Hobbits are naturally cautious with paperwork, and when Balin mentioned funeral arrangements, he grew meticulous. He unfolded his contract. The page, when opened, was almost as tall as a hobbit. The common speech had been written in careful dwarvish script. One clause read, "Remuneration paid upon success. If there be profit, the share shall be 1/17 of the total, neither less nor more." Bilbo nodded to himself. That's fair. Another passage continued, "We bear no liability for injuries caused by the following, or for injuries resulting from these, including but not limited to dismemberment." Bilbo paused, rechecked the words, and looked up at Balin. Balin gave the amiable smile of an old friend. Bilbo bent his head and read on, "Evisceration, incineration to ash." He snapped the contract shut and clutched it. The took blood that loved wild adventures had wavered at those few grim phrases. Beaufort, amused, poked him and asked with a grin, "What's the matter, Master Baggins?" Bilbo took a deep breath, patted his chest, and forced a smile. "Nothing, only there are far too many dwarves about. They've taken all the fresh air." Gandalf shot Beaufort a look. His eyebrows were nearly vertical. "Don't frighten away the courage Bilbo has at last mustered. If you do, and he fails to sneak into the Lonely Mountain and steal the Arkenstone, I'll send you to deal with the dragon who can smell dwarves coming." Beaufort fell silent. Balin watched Bilbo with concern. "Are you all right, old friend?" Bilbo patted his chest again. "Yes, I'm better now. I don't think I shall faint." Balin nodded. "So, will our burglar sign his name?" Bilbo hesitated, then said, "I can sign. It's just that." He was timid, and a few stark words on a page had conjured up visions of a terrible end beneath Smaug's claws. He looked from Gandalf to Tarns. "Can you guarantee I'll come back safely?" Gandalf began to answer, but Tarns spoke first. "I cannot guarantee your return in full, Bilbo, but I promise, so long as I live, you shall not be harmed. If any enemy wishes to hurt you, he will have to step over my broken body first." Bilbo studied Tarns. In his eyes, he saw a calm resolve, no fear of what might come. Gandalf added softly, "Bilbo, I remember you as a child, how you used to slip out into the woods looking for elves, staying out until after dark with mud and twigs on your boots and fireflies in your hair. That little hobbit wanted to know what lay beyond the Shire." Bilbo sighed. "Yes, Gandalf, I know. The world is not in my books and maps. It is out my window." Then he smiled at Tarns. "Do you remember when we first parted, and I asked you if I ought to go out and see the world?" Tarns nodded. "I remember how I answered. Do you have your answer now?" Bilbo took up the thick sheaf, walked to the table, dipped a pen, and signed. "Yes, I think I want, besides reading of adventures in books, to write an adventure of my own. If I come back, I might be different." Gandalf looked at the timid but brave little hobbit with kindly eyes. Bilbo stood and addressed the room. "What now? Shall we have another supper to mark Tarns and his friends joining the expedition?" Bombur, fondly rubbing his huge belly, brightened at once. "Oh yes!" Killy rolled his eyes. "We're not like you, Bombur. Bilbo has already fed us plenty tonight." Bilbo scratched his head. "I don't know how much you ate, but there should still be something left in the kitchen for a midnight snack." Fili hurried to say, "Thank you, Mr. Bilbo, but we really cannot eat another bite." Even Balin and Dwalin shook their heads. Bilbo let out a small, disappointed, "All right then." Tarns laughed kindly. "I had forgotten how many meals a day hobbits eat. Bilbo, in the matter of eating, you outmatch dwarves." Gloin bellowed his objection. "The dwarves' strength is in drinking, not eating. Baggins, want to see who can drink the most?" At the mention of drink, the dwarves brightened. Bilbo hurriedly suggested, "If there's nothing else, perhaps we should rest. When do we leave? Tomorrow? The day after?" He muttered to himself, "I should lock my door tight before I go. I don't want Lobelia and her lot stealing my silver when I'm away. Thorin said, Burglar, pack your things. We leave early tomorrow morning. There is little time to dilly-dally. Dwarves do not linger once a plan is made. Tarns was used to their ways, but Bilbo had not expected such an early start, and his mind whirred. What to bring? A sleeping roll, a light blanket, a change of clothes, perhaps some soap for washing in the river. Slowly excitement rose in him. This was the first time he would travel far, and with a wizard and dwarves to boot. He would hardly sleep. Tarns took the moment to introduce the companions he had brought. Thorin laughed. Quiet now, and hear what mighty allies Tarns the wizard, Lord of the Golden Tree, has brought. Bilbo, heart pounding, pulled up a stool and sat by the table, ears pricked, eyes wide. The dwarves hushed. Thorin wanted his company to know who their allies were and to bolster their courage. He had written many letters to Tarns, and Tarns had answered at length about the 3 humans with him. Bernal needed no introduction. He was known to be Fili and Kili's tutor, and Thorin had seen how the boys had grown. The other dwarves, who thought of Fili and Kili as their princes, were ready to welcome Bernal as their esteemed teacher. When Tarns named him, they applauded. Bilbo was astonished. Tarns had told him before that Bernal was almost a legend himself, the quasi-king Bernal, he remembered. He peered at the trio introduced, a silent, striking woman with crimson hair and a gleaming golden metal arm, Millicent, the noble swordswoman Tarns had spoken of. An older man in patched armor, with sharp dragon-like pupils, Egon, the dragon warrior who had faced the mad dragon Beller with Tarnies. Bilbo felt a flush of wonder. He had expected to meet the heroes of tales, but here they were in his very dining room. The dwarves paid most attention to Egon. After all, their enemy was Smaug, a dragon. Splendid, Beaufort cried. With a dragon slayer like that, Smaug stands no chance. Egon laughed. I promised Tarns that, cost me my life or no, I shall plunge my harpoon into that dragon. A harpoon? At first faces puzzled, until Tarnas explained, Egon's harpoon is an arrow fashioned from stone like dragon scale. Relief and renewed boasting followed. Thorin clapped his hands. Now that Tarnas has introduced his allies, go and rest. Bifer, Beaufort, Bomber, help our master burglar clean the kitchen. The rest of you, find beds. Bilbo pulled out of his awe, stood quickly. Bag End has many rooms. Some are a bit twisty. I'll show the way. Night passed fitfully. Excitement kept Bilbo awake. He checked his pack until dawn, when he finally fell into a brief, exhausted sleep. He had scarcely slept when someone shook him awake. Hey, Master Burglar, up and at 'em. Beaufort sat on the edge of his bed and gave his shoulder a good shake. Bilbo yawned and rubbed his eyes. Is it time to leave? Beaufort smiled. Yes. Thorin and the others are already ready outside. They're waiting. He looked at a leather case and 2 bulging cloth bags beside Bilbo's bed. Is this all you're taking? Bilbo, still half asleep, nodded. Yes, these are the lot. Where are you taking them? Beaufort slung the leather case over his shoulder, lifted the 2 bags with ease, and turned to go. To carry them out for you, of course. Sleep fled from Bilbo's eyes. Wait, out? Shouldn't we have breakfast? Surely we should eat our fill and set out in the warm morning sun. Beaufort shook his head, smiling. We'll grab a bite on the road. Hurry now, Bilbo. Don't keep Thorin and the others waiting. With that, he strode out of Bag End, Bilbo's belongings in hand. Chapter 62, Home Left Behind, The World Ahead. Bilbo hurried into his warm clothes and stepped out of Bag End. The flagstone path outside his gate was crowded with ponies and saddled dwarves. Hobbiton was hushed at that hour. Most hobbits were still fast asleep and wouldn't stir until 9, and the few who were up were either lantern-bearing watchmen or, in Bilbo's case, a great noisy fool who had been woken by the dwarves. The company spoke in low voices, careful not to wake anyone. I suppose we really could have had breakfast first, Bilbo said, glancing at Thorin. The dwarf was on his horse, looking grave. Around his neck glinted a pendant Bilbo hadn't noticed before, a black iron key, roughly the size of Bilbo's hand. The Lonely Mountain side door key. Gandalf must have given it to Thorin after their talk the night before. Thorin's face held the weight of news that had not been good. Thorin felt Bilbo's stare, slid the key back inside his collar, and said, We must make haste. You should get used to moving quickly. This is no holiday, Master Burglar. It's an expedition. He turned to Fili and Kili. Give our hobbit a pony. No, I can manage on foot, Bilbo objected. I still have to lock the door. I can keep up, I'm quite fond of walks. Why, once I walked all the way to Frogmorton. Before he could finish, Fili and Kili each took an arm and lifted him up. Bilbo gave a small cry as they set him in a saddle. Bofer had already hung his bag on the pony. Fili patted his shoulder. Relax. She's a good girl. She won't throw you. Mind your reins, Kili added. Don't pull too hard. Tarnas rode up on Torete. Torete was almost double the pony's size, even with Bilbo seated. The horse snorted at Bilbo, remembering the sweet apple Bilbo had offered the last time. Bilbo's voice trembled a little. Morning, Tarnas? Good morning, Bilbo. Tarn said kindly. Don't be nervous. Relax, or you'll end up stiff as a board. Trust the horse, and if nothing else, another apple will solve most problems. Bilbo wobbled on the moving animal. I'd bribe her with an apple, but I left in such a hurry I didn't even lock my door. Right, I forgot to lock the door. Bofer rode past then and tossed him a cluster of keys. Bilbo caught them, his own house keys. How did you get these? He asked. Found them by your bedside when I woke you, Bofer said matter-of-factly. I locked your door for you. Don't worry, Master Burglar. He rode on, humming. Bilbo opened his mouth to thank him, then remembered where he was, lowered his hand, and gripped the reins. Sometimes I think Bofer is the real burglar, he told Tarnas. I don't know what dwarves are thinking. Tarnas smiled. Once you learn how they work, you'll grow fond of them. Me? Love these dwarves? That's the joke of the morning, Bilbo said, forcing a smile and glancing back at Bag End as it receded. Still, this journey has begun. Yes, Bilbo, the world is before you, and home is left behind, Gandalf said with a chuckle as he rode up on his white horse. Bilbo offered a polite smile to the wizard and then suddenly sneezed. Are you cold? Tarnas asked. I've got small cold-weather things you can borrow. My nose, Bilbo rummaged his pockets. I need my handkerchief. He couldn't find one. His eyes went wide. He was about to shout for them to stop so he could run back to fetch it when Bofer slowed and called over. I put your handkerchief in the saddle pocket on the right. I saw it fall when I was locking your door. Bilbo felt into the pocket and found a clean handkerchief smelling faintly of soap. Oh, thank you, he said. Bofer nodded and rode merrily back to his brothers, Beafer and Bomber. Bomber, being much heavier than most dwarves, rode a full-sized horse, the same one he shared with Beafer, while the others used ponies. Tarn said, That should settle everything. Bilbo still fretted. No breakfast yet. I'm ravenous. I haven't put on my hat either, and I don't have my wallet. I'm penniless. Gandalf laughed and produced a bundle of hats from somewhere, finally flicking them until the light brown, flat-brimmed hat Bilbo liked settled into his hands. Which one will it be, Bilbo Baggins? Bilbo put it on gratefully. Hat's fixed, and I needn't worry about the money for now, but about breakfast. Hobbits need 2 breakfasts to be satisfied. Millicent, riding alongside Tarns, looked puzzled. 2 breakfasts? Why? Because by the time you've finished the second, it's almost noon, and then you can look forward to lunch, Bilbo said with the reckless confidence of a small man with a big appetite. Thorin rode ahead and turned down a hill, followed by Fili and Kili, then Balin and Dwalin. Oin and Gloin rode after them. Dori, Nori, and Ori came next. Beafer, Bofor, and Bomber followed, the latter pair on the larger horse, and behind them were Tarns and Bilbo, Gandalf riding near, Torete at his side. Gandalf and Tarns tacitly kept Bilbo near the center of the group. At the rear were Bernal, Millicent, and Egon. Bernal rode a little apart, bearing his greatsword unsheathed and resting on his shoulder guard, keeping watch. The long line attracted a few early-rising hobbits. I say, Mr. Bilbo, where are you off to? One of them called. Bilbo smiled back, chest a little puffed out. On an adventure. Adventure? The hobbit's interest vanished. You must be mad, poor Bilbo. He shook his head, turned toward his orchard, and returned to the comforts of pipe and garden, the proper hobbit life. Bilbo was briefly deflated until his stomach gave a loud growl. The walk had gone on for an hour, and he could wait no longer. He cried out, Sir, what about breakfast? Thorin halted his horse and looked back. We must reach the old forest tonight, he said. There is no time to stop and make a leisurely fire, Master Burglar. But one must eat, Bilbo protested. I'm starving. Aren't you hungry? Tarns blinked. He wasn't yet, but he didn't like refusing. Gandalf puffed on his pipe and said, This Shire tobacco will do me for a while, and Bilbo's plea went unanswered until Bomber's stomach complained with a great rumbling grumble. The sound spread like contagion. One by one, the dwarves' bellies gave a similar protest. Bofer, Bifer, Glorlin, Feely, Keely, and even Thorin's stomach made itself heard. Bilbo shot a triumphant look at Thorin, who looked away. "All right," Thorin said heavily. 20 minutes for breakfast, then we ride." The company halted. The dwarves had been hungry, but dare not say so with Thorin's grim mood. Bilbo had been the most vocal because he truly could not wait. He rummaged in his pack, produced a small frying pan and a tinderbox, and set about building a quick hearth with stones from the roadside. The dwarves gathered twigs and dry grass. Bilbo lit the fire, put a modest square of butter in the pan, and arranged sausages and bacon, all eyes fixed on the sizzling pan. Bilbo kept the pan rocking to stop the meat from sticking and asked, "Where exactly are we stopping tonight?" Thorin took a chew of his hardtack, folded it back into his bag, and said, "The Old Forest." At the words, Bilbo's smile faded and the movement of his pan stilled. He had heard the stories. The Old Forest. "No, no, not the Old Forest," he blurted, and his voice pitched high with fear. "That's impossible. You can't mean it." Thorin frowned. "Why not? What's the matter?" Bilbo handed the nearest strip of bacon to Bomber insistently, and with the small, urgent voice of a frightened hobbit, said, "Because the Old Forest is strange and dangerous. Everyone in Hobbiton says it. The trees in the Old Forest will eat you while you sleep." At that exact moment, Bomber, who had been staring worshipfully at the bacon, popped the strip into his mouth. Grease gleamed on his lips as he chewed contentedly. Chapter 63. The Old Forest before the Second Age, Eriador, and Edwaith, and even lands east of the Misty Mountains, had been covered by an unbroken sea of trees. Over the millennia, after the wanton felling by Númenóreans and countless wars during the Dark Years, only scattered remnants of those ancient woods remained. The northernmost edge of what survived was called the Old Forest. In the middle of the Third Age, the Old Forest lay within the realm of Cardolan, whose lands reached east to the Barrow Downs and west to the Brandywine River. In TA 2340, a hobbit named Gorhendad Oldbuck left the Shire and settled in the strip of land between the Brandywine's east bank and the Old Forest. That became Buckland. The hobbits there cleared some trees to build houses and set up a tall hedge between their homes and the wildwood. It was said the trees of the Old Forest had once tried to push across that hedge and invade Buckland. The hobbits answered by cutting down hundreds of trees and burning the tangled growth, leaving a blackened patch that remains to this day. The Old Forest's hatred of the hobbits only deepened, so in the Shire, many believed that the trees of the Old Forest were somehow awake and bore ill will toward them. Bilbo Baggins was one of those hobbits who believed it. He shrieked out all the old tales and warnings he knew and strongly objected to Thorin's plan to spend the night near the wood. "Have you yourself been into the Old Forest, Master Burglar?" Thorin asked. The question stopped Bilbo cold. His face flushed, and he gestured wildly. Bofer had taken over his frying pan and was still cooking. "It isn't a matter of whether I've been there. Ho, if I had been there, you'd never be seeing me again. It's a dangerous place. Why would I go? No hobbit who values his life would go into the Old Forest, let alone spend the night there." "Don't get too worked up, Bilbo. I understand how you feel," Tarn said, gently pressing a hand to Bilbo's shoulder. Bilbo lowered his hands, but his mouth would not be quiet. "Tarnas, you must listen to me. Though I am a home-loving hobbit who hasn't traveled far, I have read more words than these dwarves have eaten grains of rice. As a hobbit, I know the Old Forest better than anyone. In Hobbiton, its bad reputation is known to everyone, even women and children." Thorin was not angry at Bilbo's manner. On the contrary, he said very seriously, "Go on, tell us all you know about the Old Forest." Bilbo set his hands on his hips and nodded. "Very well, if you insist, sit down and hear me." The dwarves gathered around the fire on the grass, forming a circle, eating the breakfast Bofer had fried in Bilbo's pan and watching him with keen interest. Tarns, Gandalf, Bernal, Millicent, and Egon stood by their mounts. Bilbo's mouth twitched. "I don't know why it has turned into a storytelling session, but as long as you take my advice and understand the dangers of the Old Forest, that's enough." He cleared his throat and began. All the tales travelers tell who come to Hobbiton show how dangerous the old forest is. Any traveler passing by it, no matter what his intent, may be lashed at by branches. The trees move without wind, they whisper at night, and sometimes branches fall or roots heave up beneath a walker's feet. Those moving trees will make folk lose their way and lead them deeper into the wood. There are stories that the very paths change course and watch the people who enter them. A path that seems peaceful and safe can suddenly take you into the most dreadful depths. Bilbo paused, feeling thirsty. Beaufort courteously handed him a water skin. Bilbo drank with a glug-glug and, after a grateful hiccup, set it down. "That's all. Are you still thinking of spending the night in the old forest tonight?" Thorin shook his head. "No. You have told of its dangers, and I do not intend to go in. We will camp outside." Bilbo's smile froze, and his whole body stiffened. The dwarves laughed at his collapsing look, noisily finished their breakfast, and the company moved on. The dwarves were merry. They rode, telling tales and singing. Bilbo rode his pony, grim-faced and lost in thought. Tarnis patted Tordy's flank to make him move closer and asked, "Are you still worried about the old forest?" Bilbo started and replied, "Yes, of course. Everyone says it's dangerous. My grandparents and parents told me stories. I grew up hearing them." Gandalf put in, "But those are only tales. You haven't seen them yourself, have you?" Bilbo shot back, "But there are hobbits who went into the old forest and never came back, Gandalf." Tarns glanced at Gandalf. "You've been to many places. What do you know of the old forest?" Gandalf took a puff of his pipe, chuckled, and said, "Not much more than you, Bilbo. We should simply be careful not to enter it alone at night. The trees there are different from other forests." Bilbo frowned. "So you know there is danger. Why didn't you stop Thorin?" Gandalf puffed again. "If we didn't stop on the road outside the old forest, we'd have to reach the Barrow Downs in the deepest part of the night, Bilbo." He smiled. "Which would you choose? Camp outside the less dangerous old forest, or spend the night among the whites of the Barrow Downs?" Bilbo was speechless. "Must we choose between those two?" Tarns laughed. "Honestly, I admire you hobbits for living beside both places." "It's nothing new," Bilbo said. "It's been so for years. As long as you don't go into the old forest or the Barrow Downs, you won't meet trouble." He muttered to himself, "But now I'm actually going near the old forest. What a fool I am." Tarns chuckled. "That's the point of an adventure, Bilbo. You go to dangerous places you've only heard of, see for yourself how they differ from the tales, and bring those stories back to tell others. Think, when the people of Hobbiton gossip about the old forest, none of them has ever been there. Imagine you going in and coming back to say what really happened. That feeling is grand." Bilbo considered the idea and nodded. "All right, you've convinced me." Tarns smiled. "Besides, I'm confident I can look after you and the dwarves. Otherwise, I wouldn't have let Thorin come this close to the old forest." Bilbo shrugged. "Then I leave everything to you," Gandalf added. "And give this old man a hand too, Tarnis." Tarnis rolled his eyes at the suggestion. Gandalf in need of protection. That was a jest. Who had wielded the straight ceremonial sword with such vigor during the earlier orc attack? The expedition pushed on, passing by the borders of the Shire. Bilbo found himself in a wider world he had never seen. The country was open, the folk respectable and sober, the roads level, with an inn now and then. Dwarves and farmers went about their business. The passing folk paid little heed to Thorin's company. Though a dozen-strong party like theirs was uncommon, other large groups were not unheard of on the main road, and Thorin had his hood drawn so few noticed the kingly rider. The expedition did not attract attention, perhaps because they were still near the Shire. They rode east until the speech of the people around them changed. In Gandalf's words, they were speaking a dialect of the common tongue Bilbo, and the dwarves did not know. Thorin led the company off the main road onto a lesser path. How long they traveled, Bilbo could not say. He only remembered they stopped for a midday meal while the sun was high and then went on. They came into a desolate wilderness, uninhabited, with the road roughening and no inns in sight. Bilbo almost asked Thorin if they had lost their way, but seeing Tarns and Gandalf untroubled, he kept silent. As the day waned, the sky darkened quickly, from fiery red to twilight to black in less than an hour. Ahead the road vanished into gloom, even with torches. Before dark, Thorin had glimpsed the deep, dark green of the woodland there, trees pressing together so thickly they seemed to blot out the sky. It was plainly the old forest Bilbo had warned them about. In the black, that woodland looked even stranger and more threatening, and Thorin stopped his horse of his own accord. He held up a torch, looked along the overgrown track, and pointed to a small arched rise on the right. "Let's rest there tonight," he said. "Oh, we can finally rest!" Keely called behind Thorin with a cheer. Feely wanted to join in, but a look from Thorin silenced him, and he swallowed his words, glancing enviously at his unrestrained brother. The dwarves had been noisy all day, so one more cheer made little difference to Tarns. Bilbo, however, breathed with relief. With Tarns's help, he clumsily climbed down from his saddle and nearly lost his balance. His legs felt weak, his seat numb, his limbs trembled. Bilbo swore he would have fallen on his face if Tarns had not gripped his arm like a vice. "What's the matter with me?" Bilbo asked. Tarns called Torretti to a whistle and answered, "You've been riding too long. It's normal. Don't fret." Bilbo looked toward the lively dwarves and said, "Then why are they all right?" Gandalf, who had already tethered his horse, walked over with a chuckle. "When you compare a hobbit's fitness to dwarves who travel much and often, the dwarves will generally win," he said. Bilbo sighed. "All right, someone help me pitch the tent. I need to rest my legs." "That will be no trouble," Tarns said, and called to Millicent and Egon. "Our dear hobbit needs assistance." Before Millicent and Egon could answer, Beaufort piped up, "What does he need help with?" Tarns had noticed Beaufort's frequent attention to Bilbo since morning. The dwarf seemed to hover around the hobbit and was always ready to help. Tarns smiled at the thoughtful dwarf. "His legs are numb from riding. He needs someone to support him. The rest Bilbo can tell you himself." Egon came forward and announced loudly, "Then I'll help carry things." Bilbo, slightly embarrassed by so much fuss, protested, "No need," while Beaufort and Egon led him to the small hill. Bernal and Millicent joined Tarns. Bernal looked toward the distant trees and laughed wryly. "It seems there's truth to the tales about that old forest," Millicent nodded. "Ever since we first saw the wood, I've felt many eyes upon us." Tarns said, "It seems we are all right to be cautious, though there's still some distance between us and that forest, just in case. Bernal, you'll take the first half of the night's watch with Egon. Millicent, you and I will take the second half. Merry Christmas, everyone." Chapter 64, Unlucky Dwarves. Bilbo lay in his tent, turning and tossing but unable to sleep. Finally, he threw off the covers and slipped out. "What's wrong? Need to use the privy?" Bernal's voice sounded beside him, making the small hobbit start. When Bilbo realized who it was, he relaxed, stretched, and said, "No, I don't need the privy. I didn't eat much tonight, and I can't get comfortable. No matter where I lie down, some dirty root or little stone pokes me." From the others' tents came a rolling chorus of snores, Bombers in particular like distant thunder. Bilbo pointed a thumb toward Bombers and gave Bernal a helpless smile. "And those snores," he added. Bernal sat by the fire, the great sword of a knight resting against his shoulder, stubble shadowing his chin. He patted the ground beside him. "If you can't sleep, come keep watch with me. Maybe the fresh air will tire you out." Bilbo thought for a moment and nodded. He crossed to Bernal's side, spread a clean mat on the hard ground, and sat. "Want an apple? Don't let anyone else see." From a pocket he produced 2 shining apples as if by magic and offered one. Bernal raised an eyebrow but accepted. He bit into it. The sweet juice settled his appetite and bolstered him. "Is it a hobbit habit to carry snacks everywhere?" he asked. "Something like that," Bilbo mumbled around his own bite. "It's handy to have a little something if you get hungry before the next meal." While they munched, Bilbo let his gaze wander. Night had fallen. The Milky Way was a faint smear, and the road across the plain lay pale under a thin moon. Crickets chirped from the grass, and somewhere in the distance a wild animal called. The night breeze tugged their cloaks and carried the mixed scents of earth and wildflowers. Bilbo found himself looking toward the old forest that appeared in Hobbit tales, which didn't seem nearly as fearsome from here. Bernal noticed him staring. "Do you feel like something in that wood is watching us?" he asked with a slight smile. Bilbo blinked. He hadn't expected the question. "No, I was thinking how everyone I know talks about how dangerous the old forest is, but now we're only a few hundred paces from it, and I don't feel anything wrong. If there's a stair, it's probably just some animal drawn here by our fire." "If only it were only animals," Bernal said, and the words sent a chill through Bilbo. He tightened his cloak. "What do you mean? Is there something else in the forest?" Bernal narrowed his eyes and watched the dark line of trees. "Hard to say. Whatever it is, it may not even be human." Bilbo made a face. "What is this? A campfire ghost story?" Bernal only smiled faintly and changed the subject. "So, what did you want to talk about?" Bilbo brightened. "Tarnas." Bernal looked surprised. "I thought Tarns had already told you all his stories." "He did," Bilbo said, "but he left out things. I'm curious about his relationship with Millicent." Bernal chuckled. "I never took you for a gossip, Mr. Bilbo." Bilbo waved a hand. "Not gossip. I listened to Rogier last time he visited and learned many more details of Tarns's adventures. I want another perspective, things Tarns might not have focused on." Bernal smiled. "That's a novel kind of gossip. From what I've seen, Tarns treats that swordswoman as a confidant. Nothing in the way he looks at her suggests romance." "Ah," Bilbo said, when a voice interrupted. "What are you two talking about?" The voice came from behind them and made Bilbo start so badly he nearly dropped his apple. Bernal had already heard the approaching footsteps and wasn't startled. "Hello, Mr. Bernal." Beaufort's cheerful face peered out, and Bernal nodded, signaling him to sit. Bilbo, regaining his composure, asked, "Why aren't you asleep, Beaufort?" "Of course I'm not asleep, Bilbo. It's my turn to keep watch," Beaufort said. "Oh? I thought Bernal was alone," Bilbo said. "Beaver and I were supposed to be on watch together," Beaufort explained. "We swapped with Oin and Gloin, but the two of them went off to the privy a while ago and haven't returned. Even if they were taking their time, they should have been back by now." Bilbo chuckled. "Maybe they ate something that disagreed with them." Bernal's face grew serious. "They've been gone long enough. Aren't you and Bifur going to look for them?" "Bifur already went to look," Beaufort said, "and I came to tell you, Mr. Bernal, if Thorin wakes up and finds us missing, he'll be worried." Bilbo finished his apple. "You just came to eavesdrop," he accused, and Beaufort grinned. "Admit it." Beaufort grinned back. "I did hear you, and, well, that's how I found Mr. Bernal." Bernal cut in. "How long since Beaufort left?" "Not long. 2 minutes, maybe," Beaufort said. Bernal rose, drew his greatsword from its scabbard, and said to Bilbo, "Wake Tarns. Beaufort and the others might be in trouble. Beaufort, show me the way." Bilbo scrambled to his feet and nodded. Beaufort's expression sobered. He shouldered a torch and pointed toward the old forest. "Oin and Gloin went that way," he said. "They wanted privacy." Bernal suppressed an eye roll. At least they went together. He started off, Beaufort following with the torch. Moments later, hurried footsteps sounded ahead. Bernal stepped forward and shielded Beaufort, lifting the sword and pointing it toward the noise. "Bifur!" The runner had seen their light and called out in Dwarvish, anxious. Beaufort recognized his brother's voice and hastily translated to Bernal as the figure drew near, though Bernal kept his sword raised until he could see him clearly. Bifur's beard bristled, and he jabbered in Dwarvish. Beaufort answered for him. "He says he found Oin and Gloin's shoes and axes, but not the men themselves. There was no sign of a struggle, as if they'd simply vanished." Bernal frowned. "What was the place like?" Before, who understood some of the common tongue, mumbled to Beaufort in Dwarvish again. Beaufort translated. "He says there were a few willow trees and no signs that animals had been there." Bernal almost smiled when he heard willow trees. He tapped Bifur's shoulder. "Show me." The four of them moved toward the willows, torches bobbing. The spot where Oin and Gloin had gone was not far from camp, only about 40 paces, which only made the disappearances all the stranger. Bernal halted beneath the oldest willow and told Bifur and Beaufort to raise their torches and look up. They obeyed. High in the tree canopy, tangled in a writhing mass of slender branches, hung Oin and Gloin, their arms pinned, their mouths gagged with woven willow tendrils. The two dwarves' faces were wet with near-joyful relief when they saw help, but their muffled grunts testified to how helpless they'd been. If Bifur had stayed another 10 seconds, he would have joined them. Beaufort covered his mouth. "By Durin, what are those?" The willow branches crept over Oin and Gloin like living things, tightening and then loosening, making both dwarves twist and try to wrench free. The branches nearest the torch recoiled from the light, but the captive's eyes begged silently. "Get us down." Bernal stepped forward. With a single clean sweep, his greatsword flashed, and the branches that held Oin and Gloin were cut. They dropped to the ground with the severed wood clattering around them. "Oof, that hurts," Gloin complained as he scrambled up and rubbed his backside. The wounded willow did not take kindly to that. The tree convulsed. The earth around it trembled. Roots began to crack through the soil like snaking fingers, reaching for the company at the base. Beaufort and Bifur surged forward to help, but the ground split where Gloin had stood a moment before, and a thick, wet root lashed up. "By Durin, that willow's like a farmer with a whip," Gloin yelled. Bifur and Oin were less fortunate at first. The roots burst up in multiple places, slashing and trying to pull them down. The dwarves' balance and small stature saved them. They stepped aggily over rising lumps and fledging roots. Bernal did not hesitate. He swung his sword again and again, cutting roots and branches. Each stroke sent a spray of soil and splinters, and the roots collapsed where they had risen. "They're working together," Gloin shouted suddenly. "Those trees weren't close enough to reach us before. They're moving." "Lie down on the ground," Bernal said calmly, "and be careful of my blade." His voice was unruffled. He moved with the ease of a man who did not panic. He swung the knight's greatsword, and in the air the blade seemed to throw off invisible slashes, razor-like winds that shot through the surrounding trees and sliced through thick trunks. One after another, the willows were cut about waist-high with thunderous cracks. The uproar filled the clearing. "Oh, that was splendid, Mr. Bernal," Beaufort cheered, along with the others. Bernal kept cutting until the immediate danger was quelled. Later, when the men had caught their breath, someone murmured an explanation. These were not ordinary trees, but horns. Trees with a will, perhaps ents that had hardened into trunks, or trees that had taken on ent-like animation. The hobbits' extensive logging in the old forest had angered them, and anything that resembled the hobbits, short folk who came to fell trees and who often relieved themselves carelessly, was viewed with suspicion and swift retribution. The dwarves' size and the fact that they had gone off to relieve themselves near the willows had been more than enough to earn the Huorn's wrath. The commotion Bernal and the others had made woke the sleeping dwarves. Before Thorin and his companions could fully rouse, Tarns, guided by Bilbo, was already hurrying over. "Bernal, is anyone hurt?" he called. Tarnas rode up on Torreit with Bilbo behind him. Bilbo clutched the brass dagger Tarnas had given him and breathed easier when he saw Bifur, Beaufort, Oin, and Gloin standing together. Bernal planted his greatsword in the ground and answered in a casual tone, "If you mean a few scratches that only broke the skin." Tarns dismounted and walked toward Beaufort and the others, while Bilbo stayed on Torrete's back. Even after their narrow escape, Bifur and Beaufort still gripped their torches. The flames revealed trees Bernal had apparently cut in half. Bernal walked up to Tarnas. "These are the things that attacked the dwarves, monsters disguised as trees." Tarnas frowned as he looked at the still-moving trunks. "They're like tree creatures, similar to the avatars of the Golden Tree, but different. They move of their own will, yes, but they don't have human-like limbs." Bernal nodded. "I noticed that too. They attack with branches and roots. It's a single method, but that doesn't make them harmless. If I hadn't been here, those dwarves would have lost 2 or 3 of their number." He glanced at Oin and Gloin. Bifur and Beaufort were checking them for wounds. Hearing Bernal, Gloin grabbed his elder brother Oin in a strained bow. Dwarves do not bow easily, thanked Bernal until Bernal waved them off. Thorin and the remaining dwarves had by now come over, axes in hand, surrounding Oin and the others until they realized the immediate danger had passed and the tension eased. Thorin approached Tarns. "What happened? What did Oin and Gloin run into?" Tarnas pointed at the writhing, half-cut trunks. "Those things. Do you know what they are?" Thorin followed his finger and frowned. "I swear I have never seen anything like them." Gandalf's old voice floated up from behind them. "They are Huorn, Tarnas. Huorn." Tarnas turned to see Gandalf approaching with his staff. "You know them?" Gandalf nodded. "Yes. I did not expect to see them again. In theory, these creatures belong to Fangorn and are kept by the Ents. Without an Ent's care, they become strange, wild, and dangerous." Bernal hefted his greatsword again. "Apparently, these Huorn are not under the Ents' guard. Oin and Gloin were simply going to relieve themselves when one of the trees seized them. Gandalf frowned. That is odd. There ought to be Ents looking after such things. Tarn spoke quietly to Gandalf, glancing at Bilbo on the pony. Perhaps it goes back to the hobbits. Bilbo said the hobbits of Buckland had a great quarrel with the Old Forest long ago. Maybe the Ents of the Old Forest perished then. Gandalf considered that and nodded. Tarns asked, "Can Huorn be spoken with?" Gandalf coughed. "Theoretically, yes, if you understand Entish." Bilbo, curious, piped up, "Entish? Is that the tree's tongue? Do you speak it, Gandalf?" Gandalf did not answer directly. He turned to Thorin. "Thorin, tell your folk not to go near the Old Forest tonight. We'll start early in the morning." Thorin nodded and called his dwarves back to their tents. Gandalf singled out Bifur and Bofur on watch that night and warned them sharply, "Under no circumstances go poking about those trees Bernal cut out of curiosity. They aren't dead." Bifur and Bofur nodded obediently. Bilbo, full of hobbit curiosity, bombarded Gandalf with questions. "They're still alive like that?" Gandalf said simply, "Their roots were not severed, Bilbo. Their life is plant. As long as the roots remain, they will sprout again." Bernal smiled at Bilbo. "If we set them on fire, we could finish them." Bilbo cringed. "But that would start a fire. They don't threaten anyone now. Can't we just leave them be, Mr. Bernal?" Gandalf said, "The kindness of hobbits never fails to astonish me. I imagine Mr. Bernal will do no more than is necessary. But Bilbo, you must be careful passing through the Old Forest tomorrow." Bilbo looked puzzled. "Me? Why?" Tarnis took Torette's reins. "Gandalf only means you should be on your guard. You said the Old Forest once hated hobbits most. Perhaps Oin and Gloin were seized because their height and shape reminded the trees of hobbits." Bilbo smiled weakly. "It would be too much of a coincidence. Many dwarves and men have suffered in the Old Forest besides hobbits." Gandalf only sighed. Bilbo glanced to Tarns. "You'll protect me, right?" Tarnis nodded. "As long as you are in my sight." Bilbo promised out loud, "I won't leave your sight." It was late by the time Tarnis coaxed Bilbo into his warm tent, and sleep came quickly, despite dwarves snoring in the discomfort of branches. At dawn, a thin mist lay over the plain. The road stretched away into green grass and scattered wildflowers. A chilly breeze hinted at winter. The last embers of the campfire smoked as the company readied to ride. They moved on, Torette shivering beneath Bilbo, who missed his warm bed already. Bofur rode ahead, then glanced back. "Put on another coat, Bilbo. Winter mornings are colder than you think." Bilbo grumbled about early rising and the lack of a proper breakfast. Tarns took a fleece-lined coat from a saddlebag and helped the hobbit into it. Gandalf rode leisurely, pipe in hand. Bilbo longed for a puff and asked, "A light, Gandalf?" Gandalf chuckled, held up the finger that bore the ring of fire, and snapped. A spark flared, and Bilbo's pipe was alight. "The most convenient of magics for smoking hobbits," Gandalf said, and Bilbo praised it heartily. Approaching the Old Forest, "Everyone be careful," Thorin called from ahead. Bilbo's nerves tightened. He edged closer to Tarns, remembering the warnings. Then he noticed something strange. Tarns had several silver-white, gourd-shaped glass bottles at his saddle, and a faint gold dust puffed from them. "What are you doing?" Bilbo asked. Tarns unscrewed the bottles and scattered their contents. The golden dust drifted over the company. Where it touched, a faint golden bubble shimmered around each dwarf and Bilbo. "Don't be alarmed," Tarns said calmly. "This pollen forms a shield that will take one mortal blow." Gandalf peered at the shimmering bubbles and smiled in surprise. "How many secrets do you keep, Tarns? Even I am astonished." "Perhaps you've seen less than 10%, Tarnas answered. Bilbo prodded the bubble around him. His finger left no mark. The road curved beneath ever-closer trees. Time blurred. Thorin promised they would eat by noon when they were past the Old Forest, but the trees thickened and the sky dimmed. Panic rose cold in Bilbo's chest. The branches knitted overhead so tightly the sun could barely be seen. "Stop! We must stop! The direction is wrong. We've gone into the Old Forest," Bilbo cried. Thorin halted, spread the map, and compared it to the ground. "But this is the road marked on the map," he protested, pointing to a nearby sign meant to keep travelers from getting lost. Dwalin laughed. "Has our master burglar taken to homesickness or hunger?" The dwarves chuckled, thinking Bilbo fussing, but Bilbo pleaded. "Look up. Everywhere are towering trees. The sunlight's nearly gone. Their laughter died as they all looked up. Thorin frowned. But the map, Tarns cut in, unusually grave. Thorin, Bilbo is not wrong. We are already in the Old Forest. Maps mean little here. How can that be? Thorin asked, astonished. I compared it very carefully. Gandalf narrowed his eyes at the endless trunks. Because the trees here are different. The Old Forest moves, Thorin, like the trees that seized Oin and Gloin. Tarnas, watching the trunks, said quietly, When Bilbo spoke, I noticed some of the trees edging closer. Ready your weapons, Thorin. I fear something large is approaching. Chapter 66, Dragon Communion to the Rescue. Prepare your weapons, Thorin ordered without hesitation when Tarns relayed what he'd seen. He trusted Tarns implicitly. Thorin drew the frozen shell axe Tarns had given him from his belt. Fili and Kili, by instinct, clutched their sacred seals for prayers. Dwalin and Gloin scanned the trees with watchful eyes. The rest of the company, not being professional fighters, reacted a beat slower, but their coordination was flawless. They quickly formed a mounted formation. Tarns, Gandalf, find the right path, Thorin bellowed. We can't linger in the forest. This is their territory. Tarnas frowned and studied the surroundings. The trees themselves seemed to be shifting, subtly changing the route. Roots lifted and muscles of bark creaked as trunks dragged themselves into new positions. A gap that existed one moment vanished the next, only to open elsewhere. Worse, the air seemed thinner. Bilbo's face had gone a pale purple. The Huorn were quietly bleeding the forest of oxygen. It wasn't enough to suffocate, but low air would muddle judgment and dull reflexes. Tarnas was no pathfinder. He'd get lost in the lands between without a map, so he turned to Gandalf. The wizard nodded gravely. Leave the route to me. Do not be entangled by those Huorn. Charge in whatever direction I indicate. No hesitating. Sons of Durin, full charge, Thorin shouted. Gandalf lifted his still-lit pipe and began to chant. Before the spell finished, the ground trembled. An ancient tree nearest them swung a heavy branch. Thorin's roar cut through the tension. He seized his axe, sprang from his horse, and struck the ground. Frost rushed outward like a white tide, crystallizing trunks and branches in shimmering armor. He vaulted back into the saddle in one fluid motion. Fili's hand darted into his coat as if to find throwing knives. Kili had already knocked an arrow. The cold wave stung their faces. Fili's knife flashed like a sliver of lightning. Kili's arrow flew as quickly, and the two whistled through the air together, striking the oncoming branch. They didn't sever it, but the impact altered its course. The branch arced away and collapsed into the snow with a dull thud. The dwarves worked like that. What seemed like impossible coordination to outsiders was ordinary to them. They cut, shoved, and deflected the frost-covered limbs time and again. But this was the Old Forest, and the Huorn owned it. Even the dwarves missed things. Gandalf, hurry! Thorin panted, parrying another whip of bark with the edge of his axe. Battle skills had already drained him. His arms felt leaden. I'm already as quick as I can be. Don't rush an old man. Gandalf snapped, half in jest, half in strain. Gandalf's pipe smoke took the shape of a sparrow and zipped up through the canopy. The trees hardly noticed it as the little bird found the true path beyond their trickery. If Tarns hadn't applied his uplifting aromatic earlier, they'd have lost more of their company to the branches. The scent kept their heads clearer under the low oxygen pall. Tarns found that the trees weren't attacking him, Bernal, Millicent, or even Gandalf, as fiercely. They targeted the dwarves. That made Tarns cautious. His glintstone magic had a wide effect, and if he used it to blanket the area, he'd certainly catch the dwarves in the blast. He needed to be precise. We need help, Thorin shouted as another limb came at them. He couldn't wait for Gandalf's full directions and had turned to Tarns for assistance. Before Tarns could answer, Egon's rough voice cut through the clamor. Everyone, plug your ears and open your mouths. A deafening sound is coming. Bilbo's pony nosed closer to Tarns. Curious and terrified, Bilbo tried to glance at Egon behind him, but Tarns gently pressed him down, keeping his head low. Through the mane, Bilbo could see mottled light and shadow shifting among the trunks. Hide and cover your horse's ears, Tarns hissed. These trees are after hobbits. They can't tell hobbits from dwarves. They mistake Thorin and the others. Do exactly as I say. The dwarves obeyed. Bernal and Millicent rode up front, their swords slicing open a corridor as branches attacked. Their mounts' ears had been plugged with small bits to block sound. One by one, the dwarves and their horses blocked their ears, until even Ori had his hands clapped over his and his mounts. Thorin covered his own and shouted, "All right, move." Bilbo lay pressed to the pony's back, barely able to see Thorin's silhouette. A cold dread ran through him. He craned his neck and saw Egon's hand clutching a scarlet glow. Then, as if conjured from nightmare, a monstrous dragon's head erupted into being before them. Massive jaws, serrated teeth, horned ridges, and eyes glittering with a cold red intelligence. It was the shape of a dragon Bilbo had never seen, but immediately recognized. Dragon communion. Roar. This dragon's head came from the creature Egon had slain and taken the heart of. The summoned head bulged with muscle and bared its fangs. Its roar crashed through the forest like thunder. Trees shuddered. The Huorn recoiled from that dominance. The sound itself was like a physical force pushing at the very air. Even with their ears plugged, Thorin and his company staggered under the pressure of a superior being. Bilbo felt his heart pound, his head swim, the world slowed and bent. The dragon's looming shadow sent trembling through the trunks. It scattered the horn's aggression enough to make a path. Gandalf's smoke sparrow returned at that instant, and the wizard's voice boomed from every direction. "Thorin, lead your kinsmen straight ahead to the left. Don't stop." The words carried a strange authority that found the dwarves even through their blocked ears. Thorin dropped the earplugs as he motioned for the company to follow. Bilbo's senses snapped back. The oppressive forest opened into a wide meadow bathed in autumn color. They trotted across a carpet of browned leaves flecked with stubborn green. The setting sun painted the clouds in orange and crimson. The air smelled of grass and horses' warm breath. In the distance, an animal cried, a reminder that Bilbo was not sitting in Bag End, but on an unexpected adventure. Tarns exhaled beside him. "Good, you're back with us, Bilbo. You worried me." Bilbo blinked, still shaken. "I passed out?" he asked. "You fainted," Beaufort said bluntly from ahead. "When Egon turned into that dragon and roared, you went limp on your pony." "Not only did he faint," Bombur added, "he snored afterward." Gandalf chuckled. "To sleep through a dragon's roar, that's courage of a peculiar sort." Bilbo bristled. "Please don't make it sound like I awoke from a coffin. That's a dreadful image." "You looked nearly dead," Egon admitted dryly. "You gave this old man a fright." Tarns offered reassurance. "It was just the low oxygen and the shock. You passed out and were startled." "Low oxygen," Bilbo protested, pointing to his still-tinged face. "Yes," Gandalf said. "Your face was purple. The Huorn were feeding on the air." "Then why did the dwarves act as if nothing happened?" Bilbo asked Beaufort, unwilling to let it go. Beaufort snorted. "We've been in worse. Air's the least of our worries. You should hear about the heat at a blacksmith's forge. The air there would make you feel like your lungs were being cooked. If you want, I'll take you to a forge in the Blue Mountains sometime." "No, thank you," Bilbo said quickly. "I don't plan to visit anywhere that might roast me alive." Beaufort grinned. "Smaug in the Lonely Mountain breathes even hotter fire than any forge." Bilbo's expression darkened. Gandalf waved a hand. "Enough, Beaufort. No more terrifying Bilbo." Beaufort turned to chat with Bifur and Bombur, speaking in low tones. Bilbo, curiosity nagging, tried to recall the dragon-head scene. Tarnas, reading the hobbit's face, smiled and explained gently, "That was a prayer. Egon is a dragon warrior. He used a dragon communion. Fili and Kili know a few prayers too. I should have told you about them sooner." Bilbo's eyes shone. "A prayer. I only half expected. It was so overwhelming." A small smile tugged at his mouth. The old forest had been terrifying, and he had been helpless, but now that they were safe and the image of the dragon head had settled in his memory, something in him stirred. The took blood in him loved the scent of adventure. They halted at the meadow's edge. Thorin's voice, deep and commanding, stopped the column. "We'll stop here. If we push on now, we'll cross the Barrow Downs. Night there is worse than the old forest. We'll camp." Thorin dismounted, and after a moment's hesitation, walked up to Tarns. There was a curious, earnest look in his face as he asked, "May I inquire about the power used by the dragon warrior Egon?" Chapter 67. Arrival in Bree Thorin's voice was not loud, but it carried. Bilbo pricked up his ears, not sure whether he ought to be listening. The nearest dwarves glanced over. Gandalf let out a puffing chuckle from beneath his hat, clearly curious. Tarns looked at the longing in Thorin's face and sighed softly. That's not an easy power to master, Thorin. Thorin bristled but persisted. It's a mighty gift. If I had it when we faced Smaug, we would have stood a much better chance. Tarns glanced at Egon, who answered, Tarnas is right. The dragon communion is not mild, even though it restored my dignity. It is not something to be taken lightly. Killy hurried up, having overheard. Wait, that's a prayer too? Like the beast prayers Feely and I are learning? Egon's voice was hoarse. Yes and no. The beast prayers are from Gurang, the beast clergyman. Anyone can learn them. There's no real barrier. The dragon communion is different. Thorin's question hung in the air. Egon's laugh, when it came, was loud enough to be unsettling. You've guessed correctly. The dragon communion, by its very name, demands the devouring of a dragon's heart. Once you take one, the curse clings to you. You crave dragon blood and more hearts until in the end you become an earth drake, large and terrible, but bound to the ground, unable to fly. Bilbo, who had been listening from beneath his own little hood, noticed the gold vertical pupils in Egon's shadowed face and, in a rush of instinct, associated them with dragons. He shivered. Thorin fell quiet. A dragon's heart was not something one could simply obtain. Smaug lay entombed in the lonely mountain, the very dragon Thorin had vowed to face. Thorin swallowed and, with a firm nod, conceded. I understand the danger, Elder Egon. Thank you. Because of you, we escaped the old forest today. On behalf of the expedition, I thank you. Tarns exhaled in relief behind him. He had, privately, a supply of dragon hearts tucked away in his spatial pouch, but he agreed the curse's price was too steep. After Thorin moved away, Bilbo crept up to Egon. Are you all right? He asked, worry in his small face. Does using the communion hurt? I have some snacks, though they won't ease the pain. They might help distract you. Egon looked surprised at the hobbit's concern. He gave a faint smile. Thank you, Mr. Baggins, but I am whole in spirit. The communion restored something I had lost. Pain? No, there is no pain to speak of. He did not mention the quiet changes that crept through his body each time he used the communion, small shifts toward draconic form. Bilbo trusted him and did not press. He went off to help set up the camp. Tarns waited until Bilbo was gone before approaching Egon. Egon, seeing him, preempted the question. You're not here to ask if I'm unwell, are you? Tarns chuckled, waved him off, and then said, Not exactly. Of course I care. Egon cut him off. Good, I don't need a staff yet. What is it you want? Tarnas pointed toward the low, rocky hills dotted with barrows and said quietly, The watch tonight. I want us to be cautious. This is like last night, Egon replied. Tarnas shook his head. Only partly. I'll not rest, and neither will you, Bernal or Millicent. You and Bernal watch the path we came from. He looked back toward the dark smear of the old forest. Those trees might follow. Your dragon roar drove them off before, but horns are too strange. They move without sound. If you see any trees coming, wake Thorin at once. Egon tapped his chest. Leave it to me. Tarns nodded, then went to Millicent, who was helping Bilbo unload the ponies. When she looked up, her golden eyes were bright in the dim light. Tonight you and I will guard the Barrow Downs, Tarns said gently. You can rest after supper. I'll wake you in the second half of the night. Bilbo, carrying a bundle of tent poles, waved that he would not press them and slipped away. Millicent smiled and looked up at the pale sky. This will be my first real adventure with you, won't it? If you don't count our travels in the lands between, from the ancient ruins up to Altus and to Windmill Village, then yes, Tarns said. Millicent teased him about having respected her enough to repeat the trip 8 times, preventing her capture by the Scarlet Bloom, and Tarns laughed, casting a look toward the dwarves already building the fire. Don't worry about rot on this journey. Enjoy it. The world is a beautiful place. As the last of the sun bathed the camp in gold, the dwarves' busy faces glowed in the firelight. They made a roaring bonfire. Their iron pots flashed and clinked while spices and stew tumbled and hissed. Bilbo hovered, perturbed. I swear they cook like acrobats. It's a wonder the food survives. Tarns soothed him. At least they don't throw it away. Bilbo fretted about his rations, half gone already, and Millicent laughed. Don't worry, Mr. Baggins. After the Barrow Downs we'll reach Bree. We can resupply. Bree, Bilbo brightened. With men and hobbits together, perhaps I'll find tobacco." The dwarves spread a mat and laid out roasted potatoes, their skins split to reveal soft flesh and a rustic sort of bacon. Fili and Kili, proud and steady, brought plates to Tarns and Bernal. Gloin watched them with a pang of regret. He had meant to show Bernal a kindness himself, but had not found the moment. He resolved to do better next time. Bilbo sat with Beaufort and Bombur and inspected every dish with the seriousness of a connoisseur, critiquing seasoning while nevertheless clearing his plate, for he could not bear waste. Night passed, then dawn crept up, the sky paling and then taking on bands of orange. Nothing unexpected disturbed the camp. No Huorns had come out of the old forest, and nothing crawled from the Barrow Downs. Only distant, unhuman sounds carried across the low hills. The dwarves slept well, except for Fili and Kili, who dozed in fits on their ponies. Dwalin was about to rouse them when Thorin held up a finger. "Shh! Let them rest," he whispered, indulgent. He and Dwalin slowed their mounts and carefully tied the two boys to their ponies so they would not tumble. Bilbo, wriggling in his saddle, watched and turned to Tarns, who had been awake through the night but showed no weariness. "Aren't you tired? Those two are practically asleep on their horses." Tarns closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them and smiled. "A little weariness, yes. Drowsy, no." Bilbo made a face as if he'd asked a foolish question. A little while later, when his backside was nearly numb from the saddle, the little company crested the last rise and saw Bree below. Bree sat on the hillside, surrounded on three sides by a deep ditch and a dense hedge, with gates at the west and south. They drew up at the west gate, and Thorin dismounted. There was a little hatch within the gate. He knocked. Behind the hatch came the scrape of a lantern and the night watchman's voice. "Who goes there?" "We seek the prancing pony," Thorin replied low. The hatch swung, and a lantern light showed a young watchman peering through the small door. 1, 2, 3, 13 dwarves, 5 men, and a hobbit? From the Shire? What business have you in Bree? Thorin put a silver coin into the man's hand and spoke with the steady command of his line. "We'll take rooms at the prancing pony. That is enough." The watchman's face changed at the sight of the coin. "Forgive me, generous dwarf. It is my duty to ask." Kili whispered to Fili behind him. "So we didn't have to give him that?" Fili smacked his brother's head good-naturedly. The gate opened and they rode into the quiet streets. Pedestrians glanced, then hurried on. They stopped beneath a carved sign swinging from a long beam, a white horse in bas relief, and the name Prancing Pony clearly painted beneath. "We've arrived," Thorin said. Chapter 68. The Dwarves Are Being Watched. Stars dotted the night sky as the prancing pony glowed faintly on the lane. The young inn-servant at the door, whose job it was to see guests to the stables, dutifully escorted Thorin and the others toward the horses. Tarnas, taking advantage of the servant's brief inattention, used his spirit steed whistle to recall Torrette. The servant's distraction might also have had something to do with a silver coin from Thorin. Still, Thorin had Fili and Kili stay behind in the stables for a while. No one was to do anything odd to their mounts, which were essential for the journey. They pushed through the heavy oak door into the warm, boisterous inn. Candlelight flickered, throwing shifting shadows against the beams. Crude brass lamps hung from the ceiling, bathing the hall in a soft glow. Carved wooden tables filled the room. Laughter and chatter rose in waves, punctuated by the clink of cutlery. At the bar, the innkeeper moved deftly, setting drinks down in a trail of foamy heads. Near the hearth, a cluster of rough-faced farmers, cheeks reddened by drink, swapped loud, exaggerated stories. The innkeeper's daughter, neat in black with her light hair tied back, threaded her way between tables, smiling as she took orders. Their arrival didn't dampen the noise. If anything, it rose. Conversations tilted toward the same question: why were so many dwarves suddenly here? Fortunately, the main room was large, with empty tables tucked into a corner. Thorin's company took that space. The waitress came up smiling. "What would you like? Are you staying the night?" she asked, then, eyeing the party, added brightly, "We don't have rooms made just for dwarves, but we've a few excellent hobbit rooms, or several regular rooms, of course." Thorin produced a heavy purse and tossed a handful of silver onto her tray. The coins clinked, and the waitress's smile widened. "Give each of us 2 pieces of pure wheat bread, a bowl of seasonal vegetable soup, a pork sausage, half a block of cheese, and some fruit. Rooms for the lot, no hobbit rooms for us. Regular rooms will do, he instructed. The waitress promised cheerfully, turned to go, and Thorin called after her. She looked back. Thorin pointed at Bilbo, rubbing his sore thighs. Give him a separate, good hobbit room, he said. The waitress dipped a graceful bow. Bilbo stared at Thorin incredulously. Me? He mumbled. Enjoy this last warm bed, Master Burglar, Thorin said evenly. Once we leave Bree, you won't be seeing feather pillows and down bedding again for a long time. Bilbo shut his mouth and put on his best resigned expression. Because of the party's size, the waitress had to make several trips before every plate was down. Tarns, Bernal, Millicent, and Egon shared one table. Thorin squeezed in with Fili, Killy, Dwalin, and Balin. Dori, Ori, Nori, Oin, and Gloin sat on a high bench. Bombur, by virtue of his girth, could only manage a table with his brothers Beefer and Bofer. He wolfed down his half-block of cheese, mumbled contentedly, then reached for an ale he hadn't got. Oh, if only I could drink, he complained softly to Bofer. Bofer glanced toward Thorin and whispered through a mouthful of sausage, I don't think Thorin will allow any drinking tonight. If we're to get merry, we'll have to wait until the Lonely Mountain. Bilbo sat with Gandalf and Egon, easing the soreness in his thighs. Tarnas, at the next table, had just picked up his bread when he frowned, then went on eating. Bernal's voice, light as if in idle chat, asked, You saw it too? Tarn swallowed, picked up his soup, and asked, How many are watching us? Bernal, keeping up a casual air while his eyes subtly scanned the crowded room, answered, 4. 3 separate groups. 2 bearded men by the window, a squinting fellow by the bar, and a bald, one-eyed man mixed in with that cluster of farmers. They've been watching us since we came in. I thought at first it was curiosity. There's not much chance of a dwarf party going unnoticed, but there's a kind of hard look in their eyes. It wasn't aimed at us so much as at your dwarf friends. Tarns chuckled and chewed, as if discussing the evening's entertainment. Interesting. I don't get out in crowds much. If they hadn't let their gazes linger on me, I might never have noticed they were watching Thorin. The question is, who are they? We've got numbers on our side now, Bernal said. They won't make a move inside. But once they're outside, well, you and I each take 2. Tarnas grinned. No, better call in another helper. 4's too many. Take one wrong swing, and the other 3 will make trouble. Millicent, who had been listening, merely returned a confident smile. Outside, the 2 black-bearded men by the window exchanged a look, tossed a few copper coins on the table, and stood. Tarns met Bernal's eyes. The bearded men didn't go far, less than 50 paces down the street. Tarns stood too, stretched, and announced with a bright face to Thorin and Gandalf, I'm just going to find the privy, then politely asked the waitress where it was. Gandalf, smoke curling from his pipe, narrowed his eyes. He'd noticed it too. The dwarves had not. The privy lay at the far end of the inn, away from the front. Tarnas walked in that direction so the watchers inside would not be alarmed. Once he was alone, he squatted, and the dark gauze slipped over him, and then he vanished. The veil of invisibility, the trick he'd shown Gandalf and Thorin earlier, came in handy at last. Silent and invisible, he moved back into the main hall, slipped out the door, and shadowed the 2 bearded men. They were walking briskly down a deserted lane. Are you sure? One asked, a dark brown cloth about him and a scimitar at his hip. Those dwarves look alike. Maybe we grabbed the wrong ones. The other answered with certainty. No, I saw him in the Blue Mountains myself. The portrait matches. He's Thorin. Their conversation stopped mid-sentence. Tarns's fist cut the night air like an iron hammer and struck one man square in the forehead. He folded without a sound. Tarns dragged both down into the shadow beside the street. Such good sleepers, Tarns said softly as he bound them. If only Bilbo slept that soundly. I could use the quiet. Inside the inn, the bald, one-eyed man who had been mingling among the farmers was getting ready to leave as well. He rose, his cloak swallowing his form. He paused as if taking care no one watched, then slipped out into the night. Millicent waited until the bald man had left, then told the waitress she was tired and would rest. She led Millicent up the creaky wooden stair to a guest room and closed the door behind her. Her warm smile vanished. Millicent pushed the window wide. A cold wind rushed in and whipped her long crimson hair. Her pale face went hard and her eyes glittered gold, With a nimbleness like a cat, she vaulted from the sill, landed on the mossy tiles of the roof, and melted into the dark, tracking the one-eyed man from above. Back in the common room, the hearth crackled. Bernal set down his empty bowl. The spoon chimed against the rim. He rose, a hunter's predatory grace about him, and fixed his gaze on the last watcher, a squinting man propped by the bar. The squinting man felt the focus and tensed, hand twitching toward his belt. He wanted to bolt, but the pressure in the room made him hold still, as if a blade hovered inches from his throat. Bilbo, puzzled, piped up from the next table. "What's happening? Why are Tarns and Millicent getting up like that? What are you all hiding from me?" Gandalf brushed a curl of smoke aside and, chuckling, answered, "Sit down, Bilbo. Seems a little entertainment's coming after supper." Bernal moved across the floor. The boards thudded softly under his boots. He wore a smile like a blade. The squinting man's lips tried to shape a shout, "Bandit!" but a single sound from the stair as the innkeeper's daughter came down made him swallow it. She had just sent Millicent up. Her return eased the tension a little. Bernal threw his arm around the squinting man as if greeting a long-lost friend. "Rykard, I'd never have expected to see you here. 7 years, hasn't it? Bring us 2 pints of the red, please. Celebrate our reunion." The waitress, none the wiser, hurried off at the request. Bernal's hand slid like a shadow against the squinting man's waist. In the unseen spot, a small, sharp knife pressed to flesh. "I don't want to bleed you for information," Bernal murmured into his ear, voice low and dangerous, "but you'll give me what I need, understand?" The squinting man's face drained of color. He forced a laugh, nodded and stammered the right answers, parroting back, yes, right," as though they were old friends. To the rest of the room, nothing seemed amiss. The other patrons fell back into their conversations. If Tarns could have heard the name Bernal used, he might have snorted. "Pfft! Ha!" Even Egon, who had been away from these parts a long time, choked on his soup. The vegetable broth squirted from his mouth as he coughed. The name had a bad reputation. Outside, Millicent crept along the roof toward the bald man, and Tarns had both bearded men bound and hidden in the alley. Bernal kept smiling, coaxing and cutting both. Gandalf's pipe smoke curled, Bilbo's eyes widened, and the dwarves sat watchfully, the tense promise of trouble hanging over their meal. The watchers, bald one-eyed, the squinting man, the 2 bearded men, had counted on surprise. They had miscalculated. The 2 bearded men were actually extras in the movie. Thank you to all the readers for your recommendation tickets, monthly tickets, and donations. Chapter 69. Orcs again? Thud! Woo! A muffled scream pierced the night as 4 humans, each with their own dark purpose against Thorin, were bound hand and foot by Tarns and his companions, rags stuffed into their mouths, and dumped onto the cold, deserted ground somewhere outside Bree. The earth beneath them gave off a biting chill. Close contact with the damp soil brought not just physical cold, but a cold that crawled from the bones into the heart. Tarns, Bernal, and Millicent melted into the shadows like ghosts, faces unreadable. The 4 bodies lay scattered on the grass, breathing coming slowly back, still ragged from their narrow escape. Bilbo, nervous and frightened, huddled behind Gandalf's gray robes and peered out at the grim-faced Thorin. The rest of the dwarves were still inside the prancing pony. Thorin had not yet told them anything, not even Fili and Killy. He stepped up to the cross-eyed man, bent low, eyes sweeping him over, a faint sneer on his lips. Tarns had at first meant to take charge of the questioning. He had a way to charm someone temporarily into cooperation, but Thorin had refused. Since his head had been the target, he would question them himself. He drew his frozen shell axe from his waist. The cold metal tapped the cross-eyed man's face as he spoke in a low voice. "Who sent you to spy on me?" The cross-eyed man trembled, flattening himself to the earth as if he could sink into it. Fear made his eyes white around the pupils. The rag in his mouth only let out inarticulate woo-woo sounds. He clearly wanted to speak. Thorin ripped the rag free, pressed the chilled axe to the man's neck, and with an ice-cold look indicated he should answer. Hesitation flickered then, with the blade stinging his skin. The man braced and stammered, "Someone put a bounty on you, sir." "A bounty? Who?" Thorin asked. "I." The man gasped. "I don't know who exactly. I just saw the posters and portraits. They said if you saw a dwarf who looked like, if you saw him, go to the Green Boulevard and someone would come to buy the information. Tarns and Bernal laughed. If these men had only been spying, why had they felt that murderous intent earlier? Thorin heard the laugh and understood the man was lying, or holding back. He raised the axe. No. I'll tell you. The cross-eyed man's terrified plea ended as the frozen shell axe came down. His neck was severed cleanly, but no blood spilled. The axe's cold power congealed it into dark, crystalline shards. The man's unseeing head rolled beside the bald, one-eyed man. Gandalf shook his head with a small sound of regret. Bilbo, behind him, made a soft, sick noise. The first time he'd witnessed such a death, and the sight turned his stomach. Oddly, he felt no revulsion toward Thorin for the killing. Tarns, unobtrusive as ever, produced the flexible soul collector Selen had made for him and drew the black soul from the dead man's corpse. Thorin stood, expressionless, tapped the blade of the axe to shake off the frozen crystals, and walked to the bald, one-eyed man. The survivor's single bright eye was wide with panic. His pupils had shrunk to pinpricks. "You'd best think carefully before you answer," Thorin said, a hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. The one-eyed man trembled and nodded so hard he shivered. When the cloth came from his mouth, he stared at the cross-eyed man's severed head and blurted, "That one lied. I saw a bounty too, but the reward was for your head, Thorin. Bring your head to the Green Boulevard and the orcs will pay a large sum." Orcs. The name conjured a pale figure in Thorin's mind. Tarnis, hearing it, felt a fresh irritation. Orcs had become as ubiquitous and loathsome as pests. Thorin's voice was flat. "Where did these orcs come from?" The man froze. "I don't know." The blade's cold edge chased another word from him. "But the bounty notice is in my chest pocket. I tore it off. Honestly, I did. I don't know where the orcs came from, but maybe you'll recognize them from the notice." Thorin reached for the paper. Tarns searched the dead man for his copy as well. Tarns found a larger scrap of animal hide faster, blackened, the ink ground from something like blood, the characters crooked and strange. Thorin, too, fished a notice from the one-eyed man and found two more identical notices on the other two bearded men who lay nearby. But the hide Tarnis had taken from the corpse was different, bigger, darker, and written in a script Thorin couldn't read. Gandalf noticed Tarns's hesitation. "Is there something wrong?" "I've never seen this writing," Tarnis said. "Do you recognize it, Gandalf?" "Give it here," Gandalf answered. Thorin handed Gandalf the three smaller bounty notices and Tarns's large hide. Gandalf, who had been watching like a bystander, grew very serious under the moonlight. Tarnis asked, "Is there something noteworthy about these writings?" Gandalf studied them, eyes narrowing. "The script on these notices is black speech." Thorin went still. "Black speech?" Gandalf nodded, separating the three identical notices from the larger hide. He turned to Thorin. "These three are bounty notices, and they put a price on your head, Thorin. These men, this bald man and the two Blacklanders, accepted that job." He held up the larger hide. "This one is not a bounty notice, it's an order. It instructs that the man who finds your whereabouts mustn't disturb you, but instead follow you secretly and report your movements. The man you just killed was a spy sent on a mission." "It seems our road ahead is less safe than we thought," Gandalf said. "And you should thank Tarnis and his friends. If Bernal and Millicent hadn't helped capture them alive, we might have had far worse trouble." He tossed the hides into Thorin's arms. Thorin frowned. "But I still don't know where the orcs who put a bounty on me came from. I've told no one about this expedition." "There is one orc who need not be told to put a head on a price," Gandalf said quietly. "Thorin, you know in your heart who would do this." Thorin was silent. Then he ground his teeth and named Azog the Defiler, that pale orc. Gandalf's face tightened. "Azog? Yes." Thorin's voice was grim. Gandalf frowned. "But after you cut off one of Azog's hands, he hid in Moria's depths for a long time. He never came out. Why now would he place a bounty?" "It matters little," Thorin said indifferently. "If he comes, I will make him understand the wrath of Durin's kin." Gandalf looked at him, sighed, then turned to Tarns. "We must hurry. Azog's sudden move makes me think the great enemy has begun to stir. Azog is more than an orc. He is a cunning general. Thorin and his company should reclaim the Lonely Mountain as quickly as possible." Bilbo, bewildered by hints of black speech and Azog, asked, "What does the sooner the better mean, Gandalf?" "It means," Gandalf said to the small hobbit, "this is the last night you'll sleep safely." Bernal stepped forward, smiling. "Decided then? What do we do with the three left alive?" The bald Cyclops and the two Blacklanders groaned and shook, pulling uselessly at their bonds. Millicent flexed her prosthetic arm and let a scimitar gleam in the moonlight. They fell silent, pleading through the rags. Tarns looked to Thorin. "You interrogated them. Their fate should be yours to decide." Bilbo swallowed hard and watched Thorin, uncertain. Gandalf said nothing, watching Thorin's face with deep, patient eyes. Thorin glanced at the men on the muddy ground and said, flatly, "Knock them out. I'll fetch Fili and Kili to throw them into some latrine. They're not worth my beheading. Let them sleep with the maggots and flies for a night." Hearing that, the three men breathed out in relief. Latrine over death, certainly preferable. Bernal nodded to Tarns, and together they knocked the three unconscious. Dawn peeled back the hazy night over Bree. Thorin and his company shouldered packs, drank from a fresh well, and lashed their hardtack to saddles. The townsfolk watched curiously as the dwarves bought provisions, and Bilbo, careful and proud, selected every loaf and strip of dried meat as if their lives depended on them. The vendor's haggling still echoed in his ears when the creak of Bree's east gate told him it was time to leave. He noticed, with a small pang, that someone was missing. "Tarnis," Bilbo called. "Why isn't Mr. Egon coming with us?" Tarnis smiled. "Oh, Egon. He said he caught a chill last night. Getting on in years, he is. Don't worry. He'll catch up on horseback soon." "Right. I'll make him a nice warming soup at our next meal. Trust my cooking." Bilbo brightened. "I do," Tarnis said, and Bilbo rode off to catch up, more practiced now at mount and bridle. Gandalf, however, watched Tarns with a strange look when he heard that answer. Tarnis himself wore an innocent expression. Inside Bree, the three men Bernal had knocked out were found in the privy at morning. The bald Cyclops, remembering the previous night's terror, listened as the two Blacklanders plotted. "What plan?" he asked weakly. "We're going to collect the bounty," one sneered. "Those dwarves left us alive. We can't get Thorin Oakenshield's head, but that squint-eyed fellow said things were on him. If we tell the orcs where the dwarves are, we'll get paid." He looked at the bald man. "You coming?" The Cyclops thought of the silent swordswoman who had floored him and shivered. "No, I'll take my chances. I'm from Bree. I can live without the coin. You two go ahead." He slipped away, ignored by the other two. "Coward," one spat. The remaining Blacklander spat derisively at his retreating back. "Let's leave by the east gate. The dwarves can't be far. We'll follow them and pass the location on the green road to the orcs." "My smell," the other complained, sniffling. "I need a bath." "Bath later," his companion snapped. "By the time we're clean, the dwarves will be gone. A little stench won't stop us." They trudged off. Then Egon, the man who'd caught a chill, emerged from a hiding corner, a cold smile on his face and his dragon hunter's bow in his hand. He tilted his head and scanned Bree for the highest points with golden, watchful eyes. From that day, a little legend began to spread through Bree. Those who did ill might wake up in the privy, knocked out by the town's unseen guardian. And if they didn't mend their ways, that guardian might become a terrifying archer who could pierce their heart from afar. P.S. The bald man really is a local of Bree, Bill Ferny. He appears in the Hobbit films and later causes trouble at the Prancing Pony in The Lord of the Rings, eventually turning to banditry. Thorin spared their lives out of confidence, but among killers like Tarns and his friends from the lands between, insult is not easily forgotten. These men had come with ill intent toward the dwarves. Tarns showed Thorin and Gandalf mercy, and for Bilbo's sake kept the darker truth from him, leaving Egon, the master archer, to deal with such scoundrels. Also, in the original tale, Azog was slain by Dane Ironfoot at the Battle of Moria, but I follow the film version here. Azog remains a prominent presence. Finally, thank you to all the readers for your recommendation tickets, monthly passes, and donations. Happy New Year! In the new year, I will continue with the companionship of all my dear readers to carry on. Chapter 70, Panicked Farmer. Only a day after Tarns and Thorin's company left Bree, two unwelcome visitors crept up to the east gate. They could never have entered. They were orcs. It was another cold night. The two of them rode wargs, their bristling forms silhouetted as they snarled toward Bree. That spy, the man who bowed to the master, didn't contact us today, one orc grunted. The other curled his lip into a savage grin. That leaves two chances. Either the spy turned and fled, or he found the master's mark and was found out and cut down. A low growl answered him. The warg beneath him. The orc quieted the beast and said to his companion, "Stay here and wait for that one-eyed human. I'll sweep along the road. If he doesn't return, you report directly to the master." Meanwhile, Tarns and the company were enduring a miserable march. The weather had turned sour. The sky hung like a slab of lead, pressing down. Rain seeped through the cloud edges, pricking the earth like a swarm of needles. November's chill braided with the rain until it felt bone deep. Everything behind the curtain of water blurred. The landscape seemed daubed in wet oil, distorted and unreal. Bilbo had pictured this expedition with May or September weather, pleasant, brisk, no rain or wind, just like the cheerful tales. Now it was cold and wet. He had camped outdoors before, but at least the ground had been dry. Even the old forest's branches had been only mildly disagreeable. "This is dreadful," he complained. "I forgot an umbrella, and all I've got is a straw cloak." He glanced at Tarns, who sat on Tourette beside him, also without shelter. "Don't you find it uncomfortable, Tarnas?" "A little," Tarns said. He could feel the rain seeping through his straw cloak and into his white wolf armor. "But it's bearable." Bilbo brightened. "You and Gandalf are both great wizards. Can't you use glintstone magic to change the weather? It doesn't have to be fine. Just stop the rain. I feel like a fish in a bowl." The company plodded along the muddy track in a steady downpour. Water dripped into Bilbo's eyes from his hat brim. His cloak and straw cape were soaked through. His pony stumbled on the churned ground. Even Dori and Ori, usually full of song and story, grew sullen at the damp. Bofer, always blithe, sat forlornly holding a pipe whose tobacco had gone too wet to light. Dori, his cheeks ruddy from the wind, tightened his cloak and shouted back at Bilbo's complaining, "Mr. Gandalf! Mr. Tarns! Can you stop this flood from the sky?" Gandalf, just as irritated by the weather, snapped back, "Isn't it raining, my dear dwarf? This rain will run its course. If you want to change the world's weather, go find other wizards." Tarns could not help a faint smile at the old wizard's brusqueness, but it froze as he noticed every eye on him. Bilbo and the dwarves looked at him with hopeful faces. Thorin's expression mirrored the same plea. They were all getting tired of the weather, and they had yet to find shelter. If they failed to find one soon, Thorin would be forced to lead them through the night in the dark and cold. Gandalf's words had an implication. There were only 2 wizards in the expedition. Excluding Gandalf, Tarns was the other. Bernal, riding behind Tarns, teased, "Yes, Tarns, you know all sorts of glintstone magic. Surely you can handle a bit of rain." Tarns glared back, but answered aloud to Bilbo and the dwarves, "I'm afraid I can't stop this rain either." Disappointment flickered across their faces, until Tarnas added, "But if you want to feel warmer and clearer, I have a way." Golden light gathered in his palm, catalyst for a prayer. Golden tree grace. Through the prayer, a brilliant, warm grace flowed into the members of the Lonely Mountain expedition, infusing them with fresh warmth and vigor. Bilbo felt his numb fingers tingle back to life. The rain still fell, but he felt much better. Fili and Kili brightened too. They'd been practicing beast prayers and suddenly realized prayers could be used beyond combat. "It seems Tarns has shown us another way to use prayers," Fili said to Kili. Kili, eager, suggested, "Then let's try ours now." They drew the clawmark seals Tarns had given them and invoked the beast prayer Wild Beast Vitality. The pale light of their beast prayer replaced the golden tree grace in an instant. Their enthusiasm faded. The effect was weaker than Tarnas' prayer. Kili hugged his damp cloak tighter. "Why isn't it working? Tarnas' prayer is gone." Bernal had ridden up and, after casting the same golden grace, chuckled. "I meant to wait until you'd truly mastered the beast prayers before showing you. Fili, Kili, remember, when different prayers give the same effect, they generally don't stack. The later one replaces the earlier." Fili and Kili nodded quickly. Thorin, listening, pricked up his ears at the mention of prayers. "Mr. Bernal, do you mean someone can learn more than one kind of prayer?" Bernal smiled sideways. "In theory, but biting off more than you can chew is unwise. Many spend their lives mastering one prayer and are called prodigies for it. So far, I've only seen two who can switch between different prayers and glintstone magic with ease in battle. Which two? Thorin asked. One is a mage as strong as I, Bernal said. The other, you already know. He looked toward Tarns, and Thorin's eyes followed, comprehension dawning. Tarnies, I should have realized. While Bernal and Thorin spoke, Tarns talked quietly with Gandalf. Gandalf chuckled. It was cunning of you to let their complaints fall at his feet. Tarns pursed his lips. For now, we still need shelter for the night. If this rain goes on, my prayers alone won't let Bilbo and Thorin get proper rest. Gandalf nodded. Don't fret. I remember the roads here. A little farther on, there's a farmhouse. I know the farmer. He'll give us a night's lodging. Tarns exhaled in relief. That's good. He called out to Thorin. Thorin, Gandalf says there's shelter up ahead. I heard, Thorin replied. Dwalin, Gloin, come with me. Lead the way. They dipped into a deep valley. The rain at last slackened. A swollen river ran through the bottom, its willows drooping, wind scattering the clouds to reveal moonlight between the ragged gaps. The company soon came upon the farmhouse Gandalf had named. A dim lantern swung above the chicken coop, and in the sheepfold the animals huddled, their breath steaming in the cold air. A lone horse stamped in the distant stable, mane damp. Yet the farmhouse itself showed no light, no sign of anyone within. Gandalf frowned and muttered, Strange. Could the farmer be in bed early because of this weather? That's easily checked, Tarns said. Thorin's coin will smooth over most neighbors awakened from sleep. Thorin dismounted and approached the weathered wooden door, its stones and beams worn by time. He struck the little iron bell. The clear chime rang out into the hush. No answer came. Thorin rang again. Still nothing. Gandalf stroked his beard. This is odd. He hardly ever leaves in winter. He called in a louder voice. David, son of Dane, are you there? It's Gandalf. I'm passing through and would like lodging for the night. A startled, middle-aged voice from inside answered. Gandalf? Is it really you? The door cracked open, and a somewhat bald head peered out. At the sight of Gandalf and the armed company beyond, the farmer's face broke into relief. He opened the door wide and rushed outside, almost sobbing with excitement. Many people? I don't mind at all. This is wonderful. At last someone's come. Tarns, Bernal, and Millicent exchanged glances. The farmer's fear showed he had been through something frightening. Gandalf, still calm, asked from over the garden fence, What's wrong, David? What has upset you so that this steady man I know looks like a frightened child? David glanced at Thorin and Tarns, noting their weapons, and seemed to draw confidence. He hurried to open the gate and usher them in, sweat beading on his brow. There's a big thing down in the valley at night, he blurted. Like a brown bear, but it stands up and is far bigger than any bear I've seen. I saw it myself the day before yesterday. For 2 nights it's been near the farm, and it's already taken 4 of my sheep. Chapter 71, Troll. The farmer's cottage was small, so it felt crowded once Tarns and Thorin's company filed inside. Luckily, most of the newcomers were compact dwarves, otherwise not everyone would have fit. Tarns let his gaze sweep the room. The furnishings were plain and rustic, several wooden tables and chairs neatly set, the grain of the wood clear and worn with time. Farming tools were stacked in a corner, well used but orderly. The hearth sat at the center of one wall, a warm heart to the house. The fire crackled, casting a soft light over the pencil portraits on the wall, bringing them to life. The simple sketches captured the wife's gentleness and the boy's liveliness. Their eyes seemed to meet Tarns from across the room. David held 2 steaming teapots, hands steady though his brow betrayed apology. Sorry, didn't expect so many of you. My teacups aren't enough. Thorin took the teapot from him with a polite nod. It's all right. You've given us shelter on such a cold, damp night. That's help enough. Tarns lingered on the portraits. Are those your wife and child? Where are they now? David's shoulders stiffened. He shook his head, a loneliness flashing in his eyes. They went back to the village, just outside the deep valley. The farm needs tending in winter, so I stay here. It's only me, the chickens, the sheep, and the horses. He gave a relieved half-smile. Thank goodness they weren't here. If they had been and that thing came. He let the sentence trail off. Gandalf removed his pipe and exhaled a curl of smoke. Tell us about the monster in detail, David, he said with a quiet laugh, then looked to Tarns and the others. These are all seasoned warriors. Trust them. David swallowed and, still trembling, tried to steady his words. I didn't see it head on. If I had, you wouldn't have found me here tonight. He forced a small laugh. But the night before last, I woke to the sheep bleating and the ground trembling. Something huge passed my bedroom window. I peeked out, but it was dark. It stood upright like a man, and it carried a sheep under its arm like a man would carry a hen. It came again the next night, and the next, 2 sheep each time. Egon's old voice boomed, impatient. Skin, please. Any scales, fur, claws? David frowned, trying to recall. I couldn't make out the skin in the dark. No fur, no scales that I saw, no claws. It wore ragged, loose clothes, and a knife like mine hung at its waist. It looked like the giants the bards sing about. I don't know if it could speak. Egon sighed. That's not much to go on. Bilbo, who had been listening, nodded thoughtfully. Egon is right. I've read a lot. Nothing quite like this. A more detailed description would help. David looked apologetic. I was too terrified to get a proper look. I stayed put all those nights, even by day. I feared it might be hiding in the valley. It only came at night. His voice brightened with resolve. If you kill it, I'll pay a generous reward. He looked around until his gaze settled on Thorin. When he'd invited them in earlier, all the dwarves had deferred to Thorin. You look fitted for a long journey, he said. You'll need coin and provisions. I'm no rich man, but I've saved a little from raising animals. I'll offer a fair bounty. I can also write a letter for you to give to my wife in the village east of here, within 3 days' travel, so you can replenish food and rest. Thorin considered it. A fair price. He turned to Tarns. Are you joining the hunt? Tarns' eyes brightened. Of course. It's a monster I've never met before. I'm curious. Bernal grinned. Count me in. Tarnis, shall we make it a contest? Let's see who deals with it first. Tarns raised an eyebrow. Why? Bernal shrugged. Easy. I've lost to you so often I deserve a win. Killy piped up, admiring. If Tarnis and Bernal fight it, there's nothing left for us. No monster can stand a single blow from either of them. Laughter filled the cottage. To David it must have seemed absurd, these battle-hardened folk treating his terror as if it were a village stray. Thorin smiled, then called softly to Balin, who had been dozing. Balin, help Tarns, Bernal, and Mr. David draw up a contract for the hunt. Balin opened his eyes, gave a kindly smile, and produced a pen and a thick stack of paper. He wrote briskly. David, bewildered, looked at Gandalf. Why a contract? Gandalf grinned. A dwarven contract carries weight in every market. The farmer blinked at the formality, then grew anxious again. There isn't time for paperwork. That thing could return any moment. I must put out the lights. Balin's cultured voice was calm. When you've read it, sign, then it takes effect. His contract wasn't as long as the one Bilbo once signed, but it filled 2 pages. Tarnis and Bernal scanned and signed quickly, passing it to David. Though he knew few letters, David could write his name. He hesitated then, seeing their seriousness, signed. No sooner was his pen set than a heavy thud came from outside, cutting off the rustle of paper. Thudding footsteps beat against the quiet earth, accompanied by rough panting. Laughter in the room died away. Faces turned tense, ears pressed to the wall and ground for more. Outside, the sheep in the fold cried out. The sudden commotion roused the chickens, which flapped and clucked in alarm. Even the horses in the stable lifted their heads. Nostrils steamed in the cold, hooves clicked, and uneasy snorts echoed. Ori crept to a window and eased it open a crack. Dori leaned in a hush. Did you see it? Dwarven sight is different from a human's. No, they do not see as far as elves, but the dim moonlight was enough. Ori had seen well enough, and as one familiar with many tales and sightings, he knew what it meant. He pulled back from the window and whispered, It's a troll. The name eased some tension. The unknown had been the worst of it. Gandalf sat up, surprised. Killy breathed relief. No wonder it only came at night. Trolls fear sunlight. Bilbo blinked, curious. A troll? Is it like the ones in my books? Beaufort shrugged. Yes, don't worry. We can handle it, perhaps without Tarnis and Bernal. Everyone looked toward where Tarnis and Bernal should have been, and they weren't there. Millicent, who had stayed, nodded. They went out with their weapons when Ori opened the window. A pained howl cut through the night from outside, followed by the heavy thump of a collapsing body. Voices carried through the gap in the window. Tarns and Bernal's loud, easy banter. Tarnis, I win this time, right? All right, Bernal, you win. You didn't have to tear a great gash in Farmer David's ground to do it. If I'd been slower, your glintstone magic would have hit his head. Well, what now? You split the beast in two. How do we dispose of it? What kind of creature is this? The blood stinks. You shouldn't blame me. I thought it was as tough as a man and not armored, so I struck home. Their voices came closer. A firm hand tapped the window. Bernal pushed it open from outside, cheeks smeared and a little embarrassed. He peered in and said dryly, "You might want to clean up your fold." David stared, stunned. Even he could tell from the sounds and the men's talk that the thing that had haunted him for nights had been killed easily, slaughtered as if it were a fattened sheep. Gandalf rose then, matter of fact. "No need for trouble. If it's a troll, its body will petrify by daybreak. David, sleep tonight. In the morning you'll clear a pile of oddly shaped stones." Tarns watched Gandalf, puzzled. "Where are you going?" Gandalf sighed, setting his pipe aside. "I'll walk the direction it came from. Trolls don't wander down from the mountains without reason. Something drove this fool into human lands to steal livestock. I'd like to see why." Chapter 72. A famous Middle-earth landmark is gone. When Gandalf spoke, Tarns hesitated. "Does it have to be now? It's getting late." Gandalf didn't stop. "I am a wizard, Tarns. For a wizard, knowing the truth of a matter is more important than worrying about whether the hour is convenient." Tarns frowned. "It's dangerous for you to go alone. I'm worried. Millicent and I will go with you. Bernal and Egon can stay here. Then there'll be no need to fear anything happening." Gandalf smiled and inclined his head. "Faced with such kind offers, it would be rude to refuse. I don't know how long we'll be gone. Perhaps one night, perhaps a day." He looked at Thorin. "If you don't see Tarns and me back by morning, set out without us. We'll meet you at the village David spoke of. Within a week, Tarns, Miss Millicent, and I will surely catch up." Thorin nodded once. "Be punctual, Gandalf." Gandalf's smile deepened. "My dear Thorin, a wizard is never absent." Bilbo's eyes opened wide. "Wait, Gandalf, Tarns, are you leaving the company?" "Just temporarily, Bilbo," Tarns reassured him. "At the latest, we'll be back within a week." Bilbo nodded, but the moment Tarns and Gandalf left, he felt a new unease. Tarns turned to Bernal and Egon. "I'm leaving Bilbo's safety to you two for now." Bernal nodded calmly. Egon laughed. "Don't worry, Tarns. Not even a dragon could touch your friend while we're about." Thorin then addressed Fili and Kili. "You two pack about a week's worth of dry rations and bring Gandalf's and Miss Millicent's horses from the stable." Fili and Kili sprang up and ran for the stable. When Tarns and the others followed, they found the brothers standing frozen in the yard, wide-eyed and bewildered. "What's wrong?" Tarns asked. Fili glanced back at the farmhouse, then breathed out. A small problem," Kili finished for him. "We should have 18 horses. Even counting the farmers, there are only 15. 4 are missing." "We tied them all up properly," Fili added. Tarns frowned. "We should tell Thorin." Fili shook his head. "Not yet. Please don't tell him. If he knows, he'll never sleep tonight." Kili nodded eagerly. Nobody wanted Thorin's anger. The moonlight lay pale over the stable. The wooden fence creaked in the wind, but the sound wasn't quite right. Tarns stepped closer to the stable and walked around to the other side. There the fence had been broken down. The creaking came from the snapped wood. Gandalf frowned at the deep prints left in the earth. "It seems more than one troll visited David's place recently," he said. "The one you and Bernal killed didn't get the chance to leave." Tarns looked toward the stable and the sheepfold and nodded. "I heard the horses crying earlier. I thought one troll had frightened them, but others must have come and taken them." Kili asked, puzzled, "Why would a troll go to the sheepfold for sheep if they had horses?" Gandalf gave him a sharp look. "Trolls have different tastes, Kili, but you should tell Thorin now. One troll coming down from the mountain is cause for concern. Several is a change that calls for vigilance. Use your rock-hard brain. Would trolls risk the sun and come down the mountain for no reason?" Kili opened his mouth to joke that maybe they were just after variety, but Fili tugged his sleeve and he fell quiet under Gandalf's stern gaze. Tarns cleared his throat. "Gandalf, no need to be so severe. Fili, I'll go with you and Kili and help explain the missing horses." That promise calmed Fili and Kili. With Tarns present, they wouldn't face Thorin's wrath alone. Back at the farmhouse, Tarns told Thorin the facts. Thorin didn't scold Fili and Kili, but he did make them responsible for finding the missing horses. Without those mounts, the company wouldn't keep pace tomorrow. So Fili and Kili, along with Tarns, Gandalf, Millicent, and reluctant Bilbo, headed into the valley that cold, late night. Bilbo objected loudly as they left. "Why take me? This has nothing to do with me. You're our hired burglar, Mr. Baggins," Fili said. "You ought to be able to find troll tracks and lead us to them." Bilbo stared at them, then sighed. "All right, I suspected this day would come. Better to look for troll footprints than dragon ones." Gandalf nodded. "A hobbit's help will save trouble. Let's go before the trolls move too far." The valley, slick with a recent winter rain, lay utterly still. Silvered drops caught the faint moonlight, and the damp earth let loose a chill. The stream ran wilder than usual. Gandalf leaned on his staff with one hand, his ritual straight sword in the other. Tarns carried a sword and a staff as well, and had cast the glintstone spell Starlight to illuminate the deep forest ahead. They led. The two dwarves and Bilbo followed in the middle, Millicent bringing up the rear. They paused. Tarns scanned the dim trees and frowned. Bilbo asked, "What's wrong?" "There's too much tall grass and undergrowth," Gandalf said, turning. "We won't see troll footprints clearly in there." Tarns agreed. The valley ahead was cramped and rough. Wild grass grew taller than their ankles, and trees crowded both sides, branches interlacing to form a canopy that blocked the moon. If Tarns hadn't kept the starlight spell streaming above his head, the torches alone would have left them nearly blind. Worse, the soil here was mixed with hard stones, not the soft loam that would take clear prints. Footprints could have been rubbed out or never impressed properly. Bilbo pointed at a nearby tree. "That trunk, something's off about it." Tarns peered. Kili, ever observant, said, "Looks like cuts from a sharp blade." Tarns circled the tree and found the same marks on others. "Yes, and the trees behind have them too." Bilbo, moving on nimble hobbit feet, knelt and lifted something between his fingers. "Horsehair," he said with a pleased smile. Someone brushed past and left a few strands. "We're on the right track." "As expected of our burglar," Gandalf chuckled. Millicent, close behind, added, "Those cuts look deliberate. Trolls must be carving marks to find their way back through this overgrown valley." Tarnis agreed. "They're fresh, a few days at most. With what David said, they seem to be using these marks as road signs to come and steal animals." Fili and Kili exchanged eager looks. "Let's hurry," Kili urged. "If those trolls are butchering the horses, we need to stop them." Tarns hesitated, and then dispelled the starlight spell above his head. He had worried that so bright a light would give them away. Gandalf touched the tip of his staff and produced a faint, nearly imperceptible white glow, enough to guide them without warning anyone from afar. "Don't rush," Tarnis told Fili and Kili. "Patience." Under Gandalf's subtle light, they followed the carved marks. The trolls had made no effort to hide their camp. A fire glowed and sent up steam and smell. Two trolls tended their cooking. One was huge and iron-muscled, sharpening a pointed knife on a mossy stone. The other moved with a sly, restless energy, stirring a black pot over the fire. A scent, sharp and unpleasant, rose on the steam. Several horses were tied to a thick tree trunk, huddled and trembling. "Is it ready yet, William?" the knife sharpener complained, reaching for the bubbling brew. He got a scalding smack on the back of the head with William's ladle. "How many times do I have to tell you? Don't touch my pot, Tom. Bert hasn't come back yet. We eat together, understand?" "Ow, I'm hungry," Tom protested, holding his head. "It's not that I don't want to wait for Bert." William pointed. "That's exactly what not wanting to wait looks like." "Bert is slow," Tom grumbled. "We've been waiting half an hour." William snorted, probably because he refuses to stop eating the mutton. "Day before yesterday, mutton. Yesterday, mutton. The day before that, mutton. My mouth still tastes of it." Tom's eyes gleamed. "Then why don't we take the farmer tomorrow? I haven't tasted human meat in a while." William rolled his eyes. "That farmer looks scrawny and all bones. He'd taste sour and thin. I want to finish the livestock first." Tom tilted his head. "William, what's that? Why is there a fireball floating in the air?" William turned to look, and a massive fireball slapped itself against his face. Chapter 73, Bilbo's First Spoils of War. The troll called William only had time to cry out and clutch his face before a silver flash of steel cut through the air. Millicent appeared silently behind him like a ghost, sword glittering. William's scream stopped mid-note as his great bald head was severed from his hulking body and thudded to the earth. Tom, the other troll, seemed not to realize what had happened. He blinked blankly, then foolishly pointed at Millicent and shouted, "Hey, William, that tiny human actually cut off your head. How ridiculous!" "Oi!" cried Philly and Killy together. They cast a beast prayer, beast stone, and several sharp stones struck Tom in the eyes. He staggered back, clutching his face and howling. "You little dwarves will pay for that," he bellowed, fumbling for the saber at his waist and swinging blindly. Bilbo, crouched on hairy little feet with a pebble in his fist, hurled it and shouted, "Hey, I'm over here!" The pebble thudded against Tom's bald crown. Tom, still reeling, swung wildly in the direction of the voice, but Bilbo had already scuttled away. The troll's back was exposed to Fili and Kili. "Ha!" Fili darted beneath him and called another beast prayer, beast claw. Sharp blows felled Tom's lower legs, severing them cleanly. With his supports gone, Tom pitched backward like a marionette whose strings had been cut, tumbling into the sand. Dirt sprayed. The remaining bright eye blinked frantically. Through the blur, he saw a dwarf flash to the side and realized he was not yet crushed. Killy stood over him, lips curled in a taunt, his bow already drawn, an arrow glowing cold and moon-like on the string. Everything seemed to slow as Killy released. The arrow sang through the air and found the troll's skull, ending him. "Yay!" Fili whooped, somersaulted up, punched the air, and dashed to Killy's side. The two brothers bumped fists, grinning like schoolboys. From the trees ahead stepped Tarnans, staff tucked at his hip and a smile on his face. The scorch-marked earth behind him testified to the fireball that had come from his hand. He clapped once, delighted. "Excellent teamwork, Fili, Kili. Your use of the beast prayers in actual combat is improving." The dwarves blushed and bowed deeply. "All thanks to your and Bernal's teaching," they chorused. Tarnas looked over at Bilbo, who was peeking about with a mixture of pride and horror, and grinned. "Don't forget Bilbo's part," he said. "He drew the troll's attention, so your surprise worked." "We won't," the brothers said at once, then hurried over to thrust Bilbo into the center of their celebration. Bilbo's absurd grin froze. He did not know how to react to the sudden attention. Tarns chuckled and clapped him on the shoulder. "How do you feel, Bilbo?" Bilbo frowned. "Feel what?" "Why, the thrill of adventure after beating a beast you thought invincible. Do you not feel your heart pounding?" Bilbo put a hand to his chest and for the first time since the fight noticed his pulse thumping under his thick shirt. He had been terrified while drawing the troll's attention, but now a new rush warmed him, part fear, part exhilaration. He found himself grinning like Fili and Kili. Tarns chuckled and tapped the corner of Bilbo's mouth. "Keep that feeling. Learn to love it." Bilbo nodded, puzzled but enjoying the moment. Still, he tried to shrink from praise. "But I only threw a few stones. Fili and Kili did the killing. Does that really count?" "You'll have to ask them," Tarni said with a grin. Kili answered immediately. "Of course it counts, Master Burglar. Those stones were unnervingly accurate, better than Fili's throwing knives." Fili harumphed and protested with a grin. "Oh no, they were as good as mine. I saw one hit a nostril myself." Kili ignored him. "When we get back, I'll tell Thorin that hiring Bilbo Baggins as the burglar for the Lonely Mountain expedition was a brilliant idea." Tarnas watched Bilbo basking in the blessing-like praise and realized someone was missing. He turned to see Millicent, finishing untying the ropes that had bound the horses to the trees, soothing the startled animals. "Millicent, have you seen Gandalf?" he asked. She glanced up. "After the fight, he went deeper into the woods. I don't know where he is exactly. But don't worry, there should only have been those 3 trolls from what I can see." At that moment, Gandalf's pointed wizard's hat rose from the rustle of grass, and his aged face appeared, chuckling. "You need not worry about me, Lady Millicent. I went looking and found their cave. Trolls hide from sunlight. There must be a den nearby. Come, there are some useful things inside." Tarns's eyes lit up. He loved the spoils more than he cared to admit, and hurried toward the cave, clapping Bilbo on the shoulder as he passed. "Come on, Bilbo, let's see what victors gain." The cave was not far off. It was tucked into a bend of hillside, its mouth half hidden by brambles. Near the entrance, a torn cloth stained dark with putrid matter had been tossed aside, evidence of how the trolls shielded themselves from the sun. Gandalf touched his staff and made the light at its tip glow brighter. "Here," he said, and they went in. Inside the cavern was dim and damp. Bones, human and beast, littered the floor, and a sickening smell of rot clung to the air. Yet there were shelves, and on them were the sorts of plunder trolls hoard: shriveled fruit, dried strips of meat, moldy loaves, and crushed tins torn from unfortunate travelers. On a heap near the back sat a few jars of coins and a chaotic pile of stolen goods: brass buttons, tattered clothes too small for trolls, the spoils of many raids. Fili and Kili quickened at the sight of coin jars, ignoring the smell as they hauled them out. Bilbo, who cared little for gold, wandered a little bored until Tarns's keen eye caught something glinting in a shadowed recess. His treasure hunter's instinct never lied. A clear clink of metal rang out, and Tarns's voice called, excited. "I found something good. Swords." He emerged from the gloom bearing several well-made blades. Under Gandalf's light, two in particular shone even through the dust, their scabbards ornate and the gems in their hilts still sparkling. Bilbo's eyes widened. "These don't look troll-made." Gandalf joined them, waved the staff, and the dust fell away as if by a breeze. He lifted one of the two special swords and looked at it with a faraway expression. "Not of mortal craft," he said softly. "They are from Gondolin, high elven work of the First Age." Tarn set the other swords down and hefted the remaining special blade. "High elves, eh? The keen of this metal is no less than the weapons of legend from my own land." Gandalf smiled, but shook his head. "No, Elrond was born in the Second Age," he said lightly, returning the sword. Tarnis grinned. "I thought you might fancy one." Gandalf patted the straight ceremonial sword at his waist. "You gave me a fine pair already. I do not need another." He nodded toward Tarns and Millicent. Tarns set one sword aside for Millicent and then asked, "Who wants to divide these?" Fili and Kili both waved away their interest. "Bernal already gave us a good longsword," Fili said. He nudged Bilbo forward with a wink. "Let Bilbo choose. His first spoils should have priority." Bilbo blinked. "Me?" Tarns gestured. "You deserve it, Bilbo." Bilbo considered briefly, and to everyone's surprise did not pick a jewel-hilted blade. He chose a small knife in a leather sheath, neat and perfect for a hobbit's hand. He slipped it beside the brass dagger Tarns had already given him and patted the pair with satisfaction. Gandalf added, "Swords forged by the elves will glow blue in the presence of orcs or goblins. Keep that in mind, my good hobbit." Bilbo nodded, understanding enough to feel important. Tarns returned the larger swords to his packsack and took the one he'd meant for Millicent out to the mouth of the cave. "Millicent, try this," he offered, tossing the sheathed sword to her. Millicent caught it with her prosthetic hand and sounded surprised. "So light." She drew it in her other hand. The blade was silver and marked with runes. She swung it experimentally and slipped it back into its scabbard with a satisfied smile. "Thank you, Tarns. A fine sword. I wonder what its name is." "There are runes," Gandalf said. "When we reach Rivendell, perhaps Lord Elrond can tell you more." By then the eastern sky had gone pale. Dawn wove thin threads of light across the horizon. Gandalf looked up and suggested they return. "It's getting late. Thorin and the others will be waking soon." They stepped out of the cave just as sunlight struck the troll corpses. White smoke rose as the creatures sizzled and changed back into what they had been all along: rock. Where trolls had lain were now odd, stone formations, left to the curiosity of any passerby or the perch of a bird. The sun climbed, and the strange, jagged stones cast mottled shadows. Thorin now carried the frozen shell axe, and his sword had been set aside. As for Bilbo, he tucked his two small blades close and felt, for the first time, like a burglar who had truly earned his spoils. By the time Tarns and his companions rode back to David's farm, Thorin and the others had already packed and were preparing to leave. On the dew-kissed grass around the farmhouse, washed in morning light, the dwarves moved about at leisure, their shadows long in the soft dawn. Idleness hung in the air with the fresh scent of grass. Some scratched the placid sheep in the pen, others prodded the white-feathered chickens in the coop. They yawned and belched. In fact, the only one actually burping was the round-bodied Bomber, whose eruptions of sound drew amused looks. Bomber, determined not to let food go to waste, had eaten the 6 breakfasts David had set aside for Tarns and his party, since the riders had not yet returned and the food had gone cold. "Sometimes I worry your belly's going to burst, Bomber," Beaufort said, eyeing his brother's swollen midsection. Bomber, sitting on the ground and rubbing his stomach, laughed, honest and simple. Thorin heard the exchange and smiled inwardly. He glanced up at the sun climbing the sky, his expression returning to that of a dwarf chief, and called out, "We'll wait another half hour. If Tarns and his companions still haven't arrived by then, we'll leave and wait for them at the village ahead." Dwalin, sharp-eyed as ever, squinted into the distance. "I see figures coming, Thorin. Could be Tarnas and Fili." Balin smiled and peered too. "My eyes say it's Fili, Kili, and your friends, Thorin." Sure enough, before long, Tarns and his group rode into view, leading the horses that had been taken by the trolls. Fili and Kili ran forward, excited to greet their kin. The two brothers, their arms full of jars of coin plundered from the trolls' cave, chattered over one another as they told of their find, and Thorin's worried heart eased at the sight of them, unhurt. He listened as Fili and Kili excitedly described their tussle with the trolls, and when they paused, he spoke, "You can't carry those jars of coin with you on the road." Kili hefted an arm to show how heavy it was. "We'll dig a hole nearby and bury them," he said. "We'll take them up again when we pass by on our way back from the Lonely Mountain." Fili nodded in agreement. They had already thought about how to travel with the jars. Thorin said, "That's sensible. But remember, those jars were found by all 6 of you. When you come back to dig them up, you may only take your proper share." "Of course," Kili said earnestly. "Fili and I will only take what we're owed." Thorin patted them both on the shoulder. "Go check the farmhouse and make sure nothing was left behind. It's time to move out." While Thorin spoke with Fili and Kili, Gandalf turned to Farmer David, who was preparing to travel with them. 5 dwarves, Oin, Gloin, Nori, Dori, and Ori, had been blundering about in the chicken coop, and now deftly helped David load the white chickens onto a cart. David herself led the docile sheep out of the pen. "I'll go with you, Gandalf," he said when Gandalf asked about his plans. He glanced toward the valley where the trolls had come from. "I've lived here for many winters, but this year feels different. Those trolls make me uneasy. I'm going to the village where my wife and children are and stay with them for a while. If new trolls come, I won't want to be here alone." Gandalf smiled and nodded. "That's sensible. We have many hands. We can look after the livestock on the way." David looked around at the rough-hewn dwarves and thanked them. "These dwarves are a bit coarse, but they helped a great deal with the animals. If I'd been here alone last night, I'd have hidden indoors and prayed." With songs and talk in the air, the company set off once more on the road to the Lonely Mountain. Less than a day after Tarns and Thorin had left David's farm, 2 lean wargs leaped out of the deep valley. Riding them were 2 orcs, the same ones seen outside Bree. One warg vaulted the farmhouse fence, and sniffing the petrified troll bodies and the scattered debris left behind, threw its head back and gave a long, eerie howl. The orc slipped from its mount, strode to the farmhouse door, saw a chain across it, and drew a keen cleaver from its belt. With violent swings, it hacked at the door until the wood splintered. It kicked the door open, went inside, and came out clutching a few tufts of red hair and a muddy scrap of cloth. With a hideous grin, it tossed the dwarf remains back into the house, looked to its companion, and spat in the dark tongue. "Zidgar Dorgil, roast buzzy gimminim. Tell the master, the dwarf scum has been found." The village David had mentioned lay 3 days' ride from his farm, and nothing else disturbed the journey. Tarns and his companions reached the little place without incident. The villagers eyed the formidable group with a mix of wariness and curiosity, but when they saw David among them, the suspicion melted. Some neighbors ran to David's mud brick house and burst in to tell his wife and children that David had returned with a large company: dwarves, 2 night lords in armor, and a wizard. Tarns and Bernal's fine armor had led people to imagine them men of rank. David's wife, startled at first, quickly composed herself. She told her sons to clean the house, washed quickly, and rushed outside to see her husband. "David, why have you come back so suddenly? Did something happen?" She noticed the sheep and the missing number among them and asked worriedly. David slowed the cart, helped his wife down, and, glancing at the watching villagers, said quietly, There's a monster in the deep valley. I'll tell you about it at home. She glanced at the dwarves and the Night Lords. And the dwarves and the knight. We're friends of Gandalf, David answered. If it weren't for them, I wouldn't have brought the livestock back. The village was small, only a few dozen households, so they reached David's home quickly. His 2 teenage sons, who resembled him closely, ran out and flung themselves into his arms. He hugged them, rough hands stroking their hair, then released them. Come, help drive the sheep into the yard, he told them. We have guests. The boys obeyed gladly. The dwarves, with a few gruff gestures, indicated that David's wife needn't do heavy work and set the chicken coops in the yard. She whispered to David, I've never seen so many dwarves, but they seem kind. David grinned. I let them stay the night. Go prepare a big meal. I'll go into the market and buy some barrels of ale. Don't be stingy. The dwarves will pay. That was all the encouragement she needed. She went to the kitchen to light the fire. David then found Tarns, Gandalf, and Thorin seated at a low table, discussing plans. David placed a black pouch of coin on the table. This is your reward for helping get rid of the troll, he said, and I'll give you food and drink for the road, as agreed. Thorin made no move for the pouch. Instead, he looked to Tarns and Bernal, since it was their reward. Thank you, David. I will see that Bernal's share is delivered. Tarns barely bothered with formalities. He nodded, took the pouch, and slipped it into his spatial backpack. The pouch vanished as if swallowed by shadow. David's eyes widened. The sudden disappearance of the money made him suspect Tarns was no ordinary man, perhaps a wizard like Gandalf. With that thought, he hurried to the market to buy ale, while the dwarves began preparations for the meal. Once David had gone, Thorin turned to Gandalf. Where are you taking us, Gandalf? We're getting closer and closer to elven lands. Gandalf chuckled. I'm taking you to Rivendell to seek Lord Elrond's counsel. He glanced at Tarns and added, Elrond is a friend of Tarns. He will likely aid us. Thorin's face darkened. Elves, he said sharply. I'd rather die than set foot in elven lands. I won't ask those blasted elves for help, nor will I go near them. Gandalf looked taken aback. He had not expected such obstinacy. Even Balin's usually gentle face had grown taut. Gandalf tried to reason. Why not? The elves can give us shelter, food, and wise counsel. Thorin's answer came without hesitation. I don't want their counsel. What right have the elves to advise me? Gandalf, bewildered, pressed on. We have the map I gave you, the one your father Thrain entrusted to me. There is a glintstone enchantment on it that hides text we cannot read. Lord Elrond could help us decipher it. At that, Thorin's restraint snapped. His voice flamed with old anger. Help? When the dragon took Erebor, where were the elves? When orcs plundered Moria and defiled our halls, the elves stood and watched. You ask me now to go to those who betrayed my grandfather and my father? Gandalf's face grew grave. You are not your grandfather or your father, Thorin. I gave you the map and the key not for you to cling to the past. You hid the map and the key, Thorin cut him off, bitter and hurt. I didn't even know you were keeping them. For a rare moment, Gandalf's face showed anger and incomprehension. Tarn stepped between them, lowering his voice. Both of you, calm down. There's no need to quarrel. Thorin breathed a few times, then nodded reluctantly to Tarns. You're right, but I will not go to Rivendell. I will not seek the aid of the elves. It was a different scene from some tellings. In the movie, with their tracks discovered and orcs close behind, Gandalf had no choice but to lead Thorin and the company into a secret path to Rivendell, forcing Thorin to enter against his will. In the original story, when Rivendell was suggested, Thorin and the others were less resistant and more pleased at the prospect than in that film version. Chapter 75, The Crux. When Thorin finished speaking, Gandalf's face went stone sober in an instant, as if the usually urbane wizard were about to erupt like a volcano. Tarns moved to soothe him at once, then shot a sharp look at Balin to pull Thorin away. Balin hesitated, then steered the irate dwarf off. No sooner had Thorin gone than Gandalf's expression eased a little, though his chest still rose and fell with restrained fury. Tarnis tried to change the subject. Gandalf, he said, I've meant to ask for a long time. Why are Thorin, Fili, Kili, and the rest so hostile to elves? Thorin sounded like he actually hates them. Did the elves betray the dwarves? He added, From my dealings with Lord Elrond, I don't think Elrond is the sort to betray anyone, and when elves came into my lands, they weren't hostile at all. It was the dwarves who kept glaring. Gandalf patted his chest, took a breath, and put the stem of his pipe between his teeth. After a long draw, he answered, though a note of irritation still lingered in his voice. It can be a long tale and a short one, but to tell you everything about elves and dwarves from the beginning would take too long. Tarns grinned. Give me the short version, then. I can always ask Elrond for the details. Gandalf blinked. You mean you support me taking the dwarves to Rivendell? Tarns nodded. I have no reason to refuse. Lord Elrond has long wished to host me in Rivendell. This is a good chance. Besides, I have no quarrel with the elves. Quite the opposite. Our relations are good. He thought of the golden tree growing in his care, flourishing into something almost holy in the elves' eyes. They watched it with a wistful reverence that Tarns had learned to read. If only Thorin were as agreeable, Gandalf sighed. So what actually happened between them? You still haven't told me, Tarns pressed. Gandalf glanced toward the house Thorin had entered, then at the gathered dwarves inside. To avoid upsetting them, let's talk outside. They went to a quiet spot behind an abandoned cottage. The door's iron chain was rusted. Wind moved through the broken panes, lifting dust motes from the floor. They didn't go inside, but stood in the grass. Gandalf set down his pipe. Thorin spoke from his own hurt and pride. The truth is different, and there is one crucial mistake he made that you should know. The elves he blames are not the elves of Rivendell. Tarnins barely masked his lack of surprise. I never thought Lord Elrond would have stood by while a dragon ravaged innocent folk. Gandalf nodded. The elves who offended the dwarves were hunters from Mirkwood, led by King Thranduil, Orifer's son, the elven king of the Wood Elves. Culturally, they are nearer the Sindar. Elrond and his people are Noldor. Men and dwarves seldom see elves, and so assume they are all of a single kind. That ignorance breeds trouble. So what did those elves do? Tarns asked. Gandalf shook his head. It's not what the elves did. It was the dwarves who first made the offense. Erebor grew rich, and with the gold came hard hearts. Thranduil once entrusted King Thror of Erebor, Thorin's grandfather, to repair his late wife's necklace. Thror agreed and set precious diamonds into it. When Thranduil came to collect it, the dwarves refused to give it back. Tarn's mouth went slightly agape. They refused to return it? Why? Gandalf's sigh was heavy. Each side tells its own version. The elves say the dwarves kept what was not theirs. The dwarves say Thranduil refused to pay a fair price. The quarrel cut ties between Thranduil and Erebor forever. Tarn's face tightened. Whose account do you believe, Gandalf? The elves or the dwarves? Gandalf's lips twitched. He glanced toward Farmer David's house and dropped his voice. I lean towards the elves' account. That is not to say I don't trust Thorin. I entrusted him with the key and the map to Erebor's secret door. But there is another thing you should know. The gold of Erebor carries a kind of sickness. It is like a curse that haunts Thorin and the direct line of Durin. Tarna's expression went grave. If it's known, why hasn't it been cured? It is not a disease of the body that a healer can fix, Gandalf said. It is a sickness of the heart. It reveals itself in pride, greed, the stubborn hoarding of treasure. Thror's fate speaks to how cruelly it can manifest. I cannot say when it will trouble Thorin, only that it lurks. Tarna's jaw set. I'll watch him. Thorin helped me when I was at my worst. I won't stand by. Gandalf's face softened. Thorin is fortunate to have you. A voice behind them made them jump. What luck! Is something wrong with Thorin? Bilbo stood there, small and anxious. Tarnas had not noticed him approach. Bilbo flushed and stammered. I didn't mean to overhear. I just saw Thorin's mood, and Beaufort sent me to call you for dinner. David bought ale, and there's... Tarns smiled to reassure the hobbit. Gandalf chuckled and walked up to Bilbo, giving him a light pat on the back. Trust a wizard's choice, Bilbo. You are sure to give us surprises. Bilbo shifted, embarrassed. If that's the plan, I'd better get back before the dwarves eat everything. They returned to David's cottage together, Gandalf and Tarns discussing how best to persuade Thorin to go to Rivendell. Bilbo lingered a step behind, fidgeting. He had in fact heard most of Gandalf's conversation. At first, he'd meant only to wait until they finished talking before appearing, not to eavesdrop. But Gandalf's voice had grown clearer and louder, and Bilbo had caught every word. He felt awkward and a little worried, not for himself, but for Thorin and the thought of a curse in his blood. The meal at David's was generous. In addition to ale bought from the market, they had wine in a barrel, and David's wife had slaughtered a lamb and several fowls spared from trollish appetites. As always, Thorin paid for what he took, settling David's bill at the local rate, principled and proud, as Tarns noted with approval. The dwarves, at first reserved, loosened as Thorin began to drink. They loved their ale. One by one they cast aside manners and drank heartily. Balin and Ori alike set decorum aside and emptied cups. Before long, Thorin slipped away from the table. His cheeks were flushed with drink, but his eyes remained sharp. He climbed dexterously to David's roof and sat astride the ridge, away from the warm clamor below. The moon hung high and silver in the quiet sky, and Thorin sat motionless under its light. A few leaves drifted past, the roof tiles shone. Tarns had changed out of his wolf ghost war gear into simple clothes and was not at all the masked warrior he could be. He quietly joined Thorin on the roof and sat beside him. "Why aren't you still eating?" Thorin asked, turning at Tarn's soft step. Tarn made himself comfortable on the tiles. "I saw a certain dwarf leave the table with a gloomy face." Thorin's mouth twitched. "Was it that obvious?" "Probably everyone noticed," Tarn said. "They didn't say anything because of your presence. Are you still angry about your talk with Gandalf?" Thorin's gaze went back to the moon. "No, I ceased being angry long ago. Gandalf is right. Going to Rivendell might help me learn more about the secret door faster. But when I hear the word elf, old anger wells up from somewhere I can't touch. I cannot forgive those who did not lend a hand when my people were in need, even though I know it would be wise to speak with them." Tarns opened his mouth to answer. Thorin's eyes, fixed ahead, suddenly sharpened. "Dozens of dark shapes are moving toward the village," he said, springing to his feet. "Warg scouts. Damn it! A band of orcs is heading this way. Why would they come here?" Tarnas was up beside him, peering into the moonlit distance. Under the silvered sky, shadowy figures with glinting green eyes advanced swiftly, hunting for trouble. Chapter 76. The Soaring Arrow. Thank you for 10,000 favorites. At David's farmhouse, the observant Bilbo had noticed Thorin and Tarns slipping out one after another. He wondered if it had anything to do with what Gandalf had said that afternoon. Millicent noticed the hobbit's distraction and asked gently, "Are you worried about Tarns and his friends?" Bilbo set his bowl down, listening to the dwarves' laughter and clinking tankards, and nodded honestly. "Yes, aren't you?" Millicent answered lightly. "Trust Tarns. When it comes to his friends, he cares more than anyone." She winked at Bilbo. "The only thing to watch is that Tarns can be very blunt. That sometimes embarrasses people. It's part of what drew me to him, but it can be a fault too." Bilbo cocked his head in puzzlement. "How is that a fault?" Bernal, who had been listening, chuckled and answered for her. "It's a fault for Tarnes himself. He cares so much that he'll throw himself into grief or danger to help his friends. He doesn't know how to refuse." Bilbo's brows hopped up and down, but he still looked confused. Bernal shrugged. "You don't get it? Let me put it another way. What if a friend asked Tarns to kill them?" Bilbo stared. "Why would you give such an example? How could anyone ask a good friend to kill them?" Bernal took a long swallow of wine, set his wooden bowl down, and pursed his lips. "That's a long story, but you only need to know that Tarnas has faced things like that." Bilbo frowned. He couldn't recall Tarns ever telling him about such a thing. He was about to ask more when hurried footsteps sounded on the roof. Bilbo's eyes followed the noise, and for no clear reason, his heart began to beat faster. There was a heavy thud at the door. The wooden portal groaned and was thrown open. A cold gust swept in, blowing away the warmth and the smell of wine. Bilbo shivered, and Thorin's stern face appeared in the doorway. Bilbo felt that the pounding in his chest matched whatever Thorin was about to announce. Thorin's voice came concise and commanding. "Everyone, ready your arms! A large pack of wargs is bearing down on us." The house's merry atmosphere vanished. A stunned second was followed by uproar. This time, the dwarves were cursing the intruders. "They'll learn not to bother dwarves when they interrupt our wine," one spat. "My axe will sink into a few hollow skulls before I cool off," growled Dwalin. Gloin's voice was just as fierce. They were the first to set down their bowls, muttering as they rose and strapped axes to their waists. The others hurried after them. Only Bomber kept eating, finishing the last of his stew before wobbling to his feet and staggering under his own girth. As Thorin finished, Millicent sprang up. "Where's Tarnas?" she demanded. Thorin inclined his head. "Tarns went ahead to intercept the wargs in the western wilds. He told us to stay here and warn everyone to prepare." Millicent thanked him softly and darted out. Bernal moved just as quickly. He lifted his heavy greatsword off a chair. Its scabbard caught the candlelight and shone with a faint blue gleam. He threw a quick look at Egon. Egon grinned, his laughter rough and hearty. "Don't fret, Bernal. I'll find a high place in the village and cut down any wargs that get through your line." Keely came forward then, quiver on his back and longbow in hand. "Sir Egon, I'll go with you." The fire crackled, and metal rang as weapons were drawn in David's little house. Bilbo watched the dwarves and felt out of his depth. He turned to Gandalf. "Gandalf, what should I do?" Gandalf, still puzzling over why orcs and wargs would be here, looked at the hobbit. He saw fear and panic beneath Bilbo's composure and smiled reassurance. "Stay in David's house. Protect David and his family." Bofur stepped forward. "Let me and my brothers watch over Bilbo and the farmer. He's never fought. Those orcs won't care about that." Bifur and Bomber flanked him. Gandalf was slightly surprised by their eagerness. He met Thorin's eyes. Thorin gave a brief nod and then left with Fili. Only then did Gandalf realize that Thorin had assigned Bofur, Bifur, and Bomber to guard Bilbo. When most of the dwarves had gone, David dared to approach Gandalf and ask what had happened. The farmhouse was small. The dwarves had packed it in. David and his family had eaten in the back room, and Thorin's shout earlier had been mostly drowned out by clamor. David had only seen the dwarves leap to their feet with murderous intent and depart, and he'd been frightened. Gandalf's tone turned serious. "Tell your wife and children to hide well, then take me to the village chief." "Orcs," David blurted, stunned. He hesitated, then ran to the bedroom. After telling his family to hide, he came out with a hoe and hurried toward the chief's house. "This won't be the first time," he said as he walked. "Orcs have been showing up since spring, the first time they paid us a price to drive them off. Orcs themselves aren't the worst. People can beat them back. But the trouble are the wargs they ride. Fast, sharp-toothed, they're the real danger." Gandalf took one more look at Bilbo and Bomber, still seated and guarding the cottage, then quickened his pace. He frowned as David spoke. "When was the first attack?" "One of the hunters found them in March, maybe later," David answered. 2 men died before the others ran back. That made the village watchful, and they missed a chance for a sneak attack." "How many times since then?" Gandalf asked. David hesitated, thinking. "I'm not sure. I spent summers at a farm in the Deep Valley, but before I left, there'd been 2 more attacks." Gandalf clicked his tongue. He remembered Tarns's tale of encountering Thorin among dwarves attacked by orcs. After the Battle of Moria and the disappearance of Azog the Pale, orc sightings had dwindled. For orcs to be ranged out here and to attack human settlements meant something had shifted. Gandalf's eyes narrowed as he considered the earlier incident involving a bounty spoken in the Black Speech. An unsettling theory formed. "We're here. This is the village chief's house," David said, rousing him. A hunter in leather stood outside the chief's door, anxious. The chief himself was a broad-shouldered man with unruly blonde hair and a weathered, flushed face. The tang of drink clung to him. He looked cross, but when he saw Gandalf, he straightened, suddenly sober. He belched and asked, "What wind brings a wizard to my door tonight?" "The guard must be mobilized," the hunter said without restraint. Armored men arrived and warned of a large group of orc-led warg scouts. Gandalf met the hunter's eyes. "Yes, our friends have them held off outside the village. In the name of Gandalf the Grey, I ask you to raise the guard and support them. They include dwarves from the Blue Mountains, 2 armored humans, and a woman swordsman with a metal hand." That was enough to wash the last of the chief's drink away. He snapped upright, reached into his pocket, and handed keys to the hunter. "The bell tower keys. Ring the bell and tell the villagers to hide. I'll go round up the guards. Wherever they are, they should be assembled by now." Gandalf watched the chief sway a little in the cold night air and urged David, Go with him and call the guards." David nodded and strode off. Gandalf, already turning, answered David's question without breaking stride. "I'm going to help Tarns and Thorin." Outside the village, the moon lay like a silver coin. A pack of wargs moved through the dark, slipping through shadow and leaf litter. Their eyes glowed faintly green. Muscles tensed, paws found soft places between roots and rocks. These were no ordinary wolves, but cunning beasts who spoke among themselves. They avoided making noise, keeping low and careful. A sharp whisper of air cut the night. An arrow flashed and struck the lead warg in the forehead, driving deep into its brain. Its hooves scrambled, momentum carrying it forward until it crashed with a thud into a hummock. A high, disbelieving howl split the air, an alarmed yelp that sounded almost like words. "Awoo! Awoo! An elf? There's an elf in the village?" The pack answered with a rising cry. "Awoo! Charge!" The wargs surged, abandoning stealth. Their feet thundered over the leaf-strewn ground, branches whipping as the pack closed. Another arrow flew, white against the dark, and another warg dropped with its head cleaved. Blood and brain matter sprayed in a grisly arc. The pack's tempo faltered. The archer's accuracy was beyond what they had expected. Atop the village bell tower, Egon stood in the shadow of the heavy bell, eyes narrowed. Kili watched, stunned, from nearby as Egon pulled an arrow, fitted it, drew, and loosed. The motion was practiced, effortless. The third shaft struck true, embedding in a warg's spine. Bronze-green fur darkened as blood welled out. The creature twisted, skidded, and collapsed, its roar cutting off into a small, helpless wail. Chapter 77. "Eat my comet Azor! Too strong, Mr. Egon!" Kili cheered as he watched Egon's unerring archery. Kili immediately imitated him, drawing his own short bow and firing at a distant warg. Unlike Egon's arrow, Kili's flew feebly and fell, swaying, onto the canopy of a tree inside the village before even reaching the gate. He wasn't surprised. He glanced from his small bow to the great bow in Egon's hands, which was taller than the dwarf himself, and pouted. "Hardware issue. Not my fault," he told himself. Atop the bell tower, Egon kept shooting. Down below, a hunter who had run from the village chief's house finally reached the tower. He had already seen the two figures but hadn't chased them away. Panting, he used the chief's key to fling the door open and shouted up, "Who are you? Never mind, did you see the rope under the bell? Help me ring it." "Kili, give a hand," Egon called, still knocking arrows. Kili nodded, leapt up, and landed precisely on the platform with a dull thud. He seized the bell rope, and with each swing, the bell pealed rapid, piercing notes. Dong, 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 dong! The bell rolled through the village. Any household that had survived orc raids knew what that sound meant. Doors were slammed shut. Through latticed windows, women of every age watched with tense, controlled faces. They hugged their children and crooned shaky lullabies to steady themselves, hiding wherever a stranger might not look. The men snatched whatever tools could be wielded as weapons, chopping axes, sickles, pitchforks, pushed open their doors, and stepped into the night. The previous raids had taught them one terrible lesson. Orcs showed no mercy. Any sign of weakness only invited greater slaughter. Now, converging toward the guard compound, men gathered around makeshift weapons, while the village chief, supported by David, had already reached it. The village guard was nothing more than a patrol improvised from experienced old hunters and spirited young men. They were no professional soldiers. A few youngsters, mid-meal, froze with bowls in hand. The old hunters barked at them. "What are you staring at? The bell's been rung. That means the chief knows. Get your hunting bows and quivers. Get ready to slaughter those orc scum." One scowled, kicking a pale-faced youth. The chief pushed open his door, cheeks raw from the cold wind. "Warg scouts are coming from the west," he announced. "The knight and human wizard who were here earlier have already gone ahead. Take your weapons and head west to help." Seeing the young men move, the old hunter noticed the chief swaying and the stub of a trimmed wooden stick about to be taken up. "Don't get mixed up in this while you're drunk. David, hold him back." The chief bristled. "I'm the village chief. How can I hide behind the young folk?" "Don't be a hero now," the hunter snapped. "If you cause trouble drunk, it'll do more harm than help. Keep him here until he sobers up." David nodded, slack-faced. The old hunter shook his head at the chief's protest and strode out with the others to the west. The bell had done its job. The howls of the wargs, keen-eared, anxious, answered in the night. It wasn't the howl of routed beasts, but a call for reinforcements. The hunters had slain some of their kin. The warg scouts had been shot. The sharpshooter in the village had already cut down 8 of them. From behind the scouts, an entire force of orcs on wargs surged forward, led by Yazneg, the orc who had discovered the dwarves' tracks. "We've been discovered! Full speed ahead! Kill all those humans and dwarves, especially that dwarf with a bounty. Bring me his head!" Yazneg barked in black speech. "Yes, sir." Hordes of warg riders broke from cover. "Don't attack from one direction. Split up and make that human wizard busy," Yazneg ordered. There were over 100 orc riders, neither the ragtag looters of past raids nor a mere dozen scouts. These were a trained force, enough to raise the village and leave the dwarves no chance. Yazneg had not wanted all of them at first. He lacked the authority and thought it unnecessary. But word had reached Bree. A human wizard had been seen with the dwarves, and among the armored men, one matched the description of the ferocious wizard who slew orcs and occupied Limgrave Greatbridge. That wizard had a reputation for charging into battle with a great sword larger than himself and for wielding glintstone magic with lethal effect. Yazneg's report to his master had brought this whole unit out of Wind Peak along the Green Boulevard. Seeing so many warg riders sent Yazneg a chill, but bloodlust quickly replaced it. He imagined the heads, the bounty he would claim. Then the forward wave of orcs slowed, confusion rippling through them. "What's the hold?" Yazneg roared. His warg twitched its nose, growled low. From ahead came a rumbling that grew and grew, then an enormous torrent of teal-blue magic. A destructive surge sliced past Yazneg's right ear and swept back. The world became a sheet of burning light for a moment. When the magical turbulence subsided, teal-blue motes drifted like dying stardust in the moonlight. The ground had been torn, the earth split in a ragged wound. Yazneg had been thrown from his warg and landed in a sitting slump. The warg itself lay gutted, half its body vanished, a nightmare of exposed organs and dark blood spilling onto the cold soil. Yazneg clutched what remained of his limbs and felt a molten pain. His right arm and lower right leg, part of his torso, suddenly gone, the cross-sections impossibly clean, as if cut by a blade of light. Blood gushed like a torn river. He realized the warg had not thrown him. Its entire right half had been evaporated. The remaining left half slumped uselessly, its entrails spilling out. Life drained from Yazneg like sand through an hourglass. Cold crept into his bones. He dragged himself on his left hand and leg like a wounded dog until another teal-blue torrent filled his vision. Then, as abruptly as a switched-off screen, his consciousness snapped away into darkness. 2 minutes earlier, Tarn stood on the road leading to the village, brow creased as wargs streamed toward him. Egon's archery had felled some, but many still came. Without using glintstone magic, he could not stop them all. Mobility favored the attackers. Even mounted on Torete, he couldn't hold every approach alone. He had brought only a few sips worth of cerulean tears, too little for a prolonged battle. He needed to pick a spell that would kill as many wargs as possible with minimal magic consumption. Then the bell rang in the village, and the wargs howled. More and more orc riders poured forward from the scouts' direction. Tarns relaxed a fraction. The enemy numbers were greater than he'd feared, which meant he could burn through more magic rather than hoard it. He couldn't stop them all alone anyway. If he could take out the bulk now, Bernal and Thorin could handle the rest. He removed his white wolf war ghost helm, set a head-shaped dark green gem upon his brow, and wrapped old cloth around his face. He rummaged through his spatial pack for the talismans needed to cast the glintstone magic. He wasn't a regular caster. He preferred the greatsword. It had been some time since he'd used this spell, so he felt rusty as he fitted talismans into a pouch, Radagon's Soraseal, Marika's Soraseal, and the magic scorpion charm. When he finished, the object in his hand was a dark green crystal staff, the Comet Azur, its color matching the gem on his head. Beneath his feet, Tarns traced a glowing sigil. The magic array flared to brilliant azure life. Glintstone magic Terra Magica. The array amplified the power of any glintstone magic cast within it. He produced a slender flask of wondrous physic that glowed blue, popped the cork, and drank. A surge of magic flowed through him. His cloak billowed as if a wind had risen. The warg scouts were 40 meters off, 20 meters, close enough now to read the hair standing on each other's necks. Tarns lifted his right hand. The tip of the staff pointed at the charging wargs and their riders. "The show is over," Tarns thought, then spat the words aloud as he let the spell loose. A concentrated torrent of teal-blue light erupted, occupying every eye that looked his way. For an instant, its glow outshone the moon. The comet Azog moved with brutal speed. The orcs and wargs didn't have time to scatter. They were cut down in a straight, devastating line. The bolt tore through flesh and beast alike with surgical precision, leaving a swath of ruined earth and falling bodies. Chapter 78. Gandalf's Anxiety. Tarns felt mentally exhausted. His head throbbed from nearly depleted magic, so he quickly let the glintstone magic in his hand fade. He set down his staff and scratched the back of his head to ease the pain. The first comet Azog had lasted nearly half a minute because of a cerulean hidden tear tucked into his flask of wondrous physic. The tear let him cast glintstone magic without drawing on his own power for 15 seconds. The second comet Azog, however, burned entirely through his own reserves and ended far more quickly. Still, the toll had been worth it. More than 70% of the warg scouts and their orc riders lay dead by his hand. The remaining orcs, still stunned and terrified by the display of magic, had not yet recovered. Tarns fished a cerulean flask from his spatial pack and took 2 quick sips. The cold, oddly burning liquid slid down his throat and rapidly replenished his magic. His headache eased. He stowed the flask, only 3 sips left, and shifted the Azog's glintstone crown back into his white wolf war ghost helmet, while his staff rematerialized as a greatsword. To his surprise, the orcs ran. It's the wizard in the wolf armor, the orc bane. He's here," they yelled as they fled. Tarns blinked and then, remembering the chaos of a large-scale orc night raid, realized that he must have struck down the orc captain leading this band. That would explain their panic. He had always thought orc captains stayed behind their lines, afraid to die, and only emerging when victory was certain. He also took out the flexible soul collector Selen had made and began absorbing the souls of the dead orcs and wargs. Once this expedition ended, the golden tree would surely grow quickly again. Thorin's war cries rose from behind him as the dwarves charged, weapons raised. Their stout legs ate ground almost as fast as the fleeing orcs. The orc riders, mistaking the tiny but furious cluster of dwarves for an ambush, urged their wargs to flee even faster. When the villagers of David's village poured out after the dwarves, brandishing hunting bows and farm tools, the remaining skeptical orcs lost heart entirely and fled. Egon's bow did the rest. He picked off 3 more slow-running orcs, and the archer's pressure made escape a necessity. Thorin didn't pursue the retreating orcs. He stopped beside Tarns and regarded him with surprised gray-blue eyes. Tarns touched his face guard. "What's wrong, Thorin?" Thorin's Adam's apple bobbed. "I didn't expect you to use such powerful glintstone magic. Your strength is beyond what I imagined." He relaxed into a brief smile. "But if you can do that, we have a much better chance against the dragon." Footsteps approached, Millicent and Bernal, then a hurried Gandalf. "Millicent and I checked the other approaches," Bernal explained when he saw Tarn's gaze. "We feared the orcs might attack from other directions, but it seems they only intended the western assault." Millicent nodded, golden eyes full of concern. "Are you hurt anywhere?" she asked softly. Gandalf inspected Tarns with an expression that was almost childlike in its intensity, then loudly interjected. "Injured? No. In Middle-earth now, only the dragon in the Lonely Mountain could truly harm him. These little orcs and wargs won't, unless he lets his guard down." Tarnas shot Gandalf a strange look. He had never heard the wizard speak so loudly. Gandalf hurried to his side, gripped his arm, and pulled him a step aside. "You," he began fiercely, then paused when Tarns looked puzzled. It was as if Gandalf's eyes were asking, "How can you wield such powerful glintstone magic so casually?" Gandalf let out a long sigh. "I know you are of extraordinary origin, Tarns. If you're permitted such power, my words are of little consequence. Still, I must ask you not to use such dangerous glintstone magic where friendly people are, or where it could leave permanent scars on the land." Tarnas nodded. "I understand, Gandalf. I hate seeing beautiful places turned into desolate, corrupted ground by strange magic." The skirmish ended with fewer than 20% of the orc riders escaping. If Azog, the orc captain who had been killed by the comet Azur, could have seen the slaughter, he might have been relieved to have died in such unequal battle. Otherwise, he might have been torn apart by his own wargs for failing. After the dwarves returned, the old hunter and his guards came to thank Tarns respectfully. Gandalf wandered off while the two groups exchanged pleasantries and turned over several relatively intact orc and warg corpses. The more Gandalf examined the crude armor and gear, the grimmer his expression grew. He even flopped down on a warg carcass, took out his pipe, lit it, and began to puff contemplatively. Tarnis noticed the change. He declined the hunter's offer to talk, drew Bernal off to speak with the villagers for a moment, then walked over to Gandalf himself. "What's wrong, Gandalf? You look troubled." Gandalf exhaled a ring of smoke and spoke in a low voice. "I've discovered something disturbing, Tarnis. These attackers were not ordinary raiders who slipped in from the west. Look at their equipment. They aren't an army from your domain, but they are trained, elite soldiers among the orcs, specially outfitted and prepared." Tarns tilted his head, catching the pale light that shimmered from Gandalf's staff, and looked down at the orc corpses scattered across the ground. Chapter 79, Radagast the Brown. Gandalf drew another long puff from his pipe and blew the smoke away before he spoke to Tarns. "Do you remember the trolls we met a short while ago? Those three must have come down from the Etten Moors. When did mountain trolls ever dare travel this far south? Not in many years, not since the last time the shadow grew strong." Tarnis, who had taken off his white wolf war helm, shrugged with a look that said, "How should I know? I don't pretend to know as much as you, Gandalf, but I believe you. Something is wrong, very wrong. Like David said, if we hadn't stayed the night, after the trolls finished off his sheep and his chickens, it might have been him in a few days." Gandalf puffed his pipe again. "Then I must take this company of dwarves to Rivendell. There are things I must speak of with Lord Elrond. I feel uneasy, Tarns. Thorin has a bounty on his head, spoken in black speech. Trolls are drifting south, and now we have found an entire force of orcs riding wargs nearby. I have a bad feeling. It's as if everything I fear is beginning to slide downhill, like a dwarf mining cart run off its rails." "Dwarf mining carts don't derail. If we reclaim the Lonely Mountain, I'll show you how solid dwarf engineering is," Thorin's voice came from behind Tarns. Gandalf saw him and felt the headache return. He had not forgotten their quarrel earlier that day. He took another drag from his pipe. "It was only a metaphor, Thorin. If you object to a dwarf cart, I can change it to fallen elven trees. The point is, something serious is happening in places we do not yet understand." Thorin permitted the faintest of smiles when Gandalf changed the image. "Fallen elven trees, then. A good metaphor, wizard." Gandalf shook his head. "It would be better if you weren't so hostile toward the elves. If, when you and your kin chased those orcs just now, one among you had been kept alive to question, we might have learned who brought this army here and why your head is coveted." Thorin's face darkened. "An army? Weren't these orcs just raiding the village?" Gandalf jabbed his staff toward the orc corpses. "You who fought at Moria, can you honestly not tell the style of their armor?" Thorin stepped closer. He saw the mail and plates, the cruel, familiar cut of helm and vambrace, and his face grew grave. Balin, who had also stood at Moria, hurried over when he noticed Thorin's change. He feared another quarrel with Gandalf. This expedition still required the wizard's help, but the sight of the dead orcs silenced him as well. Memories came upon them both, the unmarked graves, the comrades left in the open, the pyres that burned for days. "That kind of armor," Balin said at last, voice low, "I haven't seen it in many years. It's the style of Azog's orcs." Thorin nodded without speaking. Gandalf looked from Thorin to Balin. "Yes, Azog the Pale. Thorin, who else did you tell about this expedition?" Thorin fixed Gandalf with a steady look. "Only Tarns. I invited him to join us and no one else." Tarns interjected. "There were also dwarf representatives from the Seven Kingdoms." Thorin's temper flared. "Are you suggesting someone betrayed me? If you question the loyalty of my kin..." Tarns held up a placating hand. "I'm not saying a betrayal has occurred, Thorin, but we can't rule out carelessness. Dwarves drink and celebrate. Someone might have gotten drunk and spoken of your plans in plain earshot. Not everyone in the Blue Mountains is a dwarf, you know. Balin leaned close and murmured to Thorin, "Calm, my king. Tarnis does not mean to dishonor our kin." The heat faded from Thorin's expression. His gray-blue eyes darted away for a moment. Guilt softened his features. "I'm sorry, Tarns. Azog, I didn't mean it." His voice quieted, then he turned and faced Gandalf. "And Gandalf, I shouldn't have been so furious with you earlier. You didn't have to keep the key in the map for my father, yet you did." Gandalf sighed. "So, will you come quietly to Rivendell now?" Thorin closed his mouth and turned his back, walking off. Gandalf remained seated on a warg carcass, puffing at his pipe and grumbling, "Damn dwarf stubbornness." Tarns went after Thorin, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder and offering a friend's smile. "Balin, take Thorin to rest," he said to the anxious dwarf. "It's late. If he doesn't sleep now, it will hamper our journey tomorrow." Balin nodded and tugged Thorin away. Gandalf watched them go, blew another smoke ring, and then turned back to Tarns. "You've seen it. The stubbornness is incurable. Even now, he nurses some imagined grievance with the elves. How will you ever persuade him?" Tarnis's face showed the same worry. "I tried earlier tonight. Thorin slipped out during the evening meal. I followed him, thinking I might finally understand the root of his anger toward the elves. I almost had a chance to reason with him. But then the warg scouts arrived, and everything was interrupted. I don't know when such an opportunity will come again." Gandalf rose, leaning on his staff. Tarns asked, "Where are you going?" "To sleep," Gandalf replied without looking back. "If I don't, those dwarves will wear me out with their stubbornness by morning." Dawn the next day broke pale through a thin mist. The company was already awake and gathering. Thorin, now aware that traveling to the Lonely Mountain might not be safe, insisted on an early start and refused the village chief's warm offer of shelter for a few more days. Bilbo yawned and rubbed his eyes. He had not slept well, fretting whether the orcs might return despite Tarns's confident assurances. The dwarves, apart from Oin and Gloin, who had stood watch, had slept like logs, snoring that only added to Bilbo's unease. He had always preferred the safety of his own tent. "Hey, wake up, we're leaving," Beaufort said, waving a hand before Bilbo's half-closed eyes and prodding his shoulder until the hobbit blinked awake. The dwarves laughed at Bilbo's sleep-fogged face, all except Thorin, who was calm and measured. He glanced briefly at Bilbo, then at Tarnis and Gandalf, and simply said, "Let us go." "Shall we say goodbye to David?" Bilbo asked, sleepy. "No need," Beaufort said. "They're still asleep. Thorin plans to be gone before the village wakes." Bilbo could do nothing but nod and mount his pony. As they rode, he thanked the dwarves for being able to get up so early after their drinking the night before. Bombur belched and declared the ale hardly enough for him alone. Beaufort teased Bombur and then turned to Bilbo. "If you insist on gratitude, we will accept. Next time you must have more wine ready, so you may learn the true measure of dwarf appetite." Tarn smiled at their banter, but the smile faded when he saw Gandalf's worry. "You don't have to mind me," Gandalf told him. Tarns pouted, "But your face is hard not to mind." Gandalf sighed. "I'm just trying to find a way to talk some sense into Thorin. If you'd been honest about dwarf stubbornness, you'd have the same expression." Millicent, who had accompanied Tarnis, spoke softly, reassuring the wizard. "Trust Tarnis, Master Gandalf. He'll see Thorin to Rivendell." The journey continued without rain for the next few days, but the year's end came on with a sting. The weather grew steadily colder. Winter swept down like a merciless ruler, turning green fields to withered brown and forcing the company into heavier garments. The dwarves were bundled into thick padded coats. Bilbo was left with 3 layers of autumn clothing and still felt the bite of cold at his collar and wrists. "Achoo!" Bilbo sneezed and rubbed his reddening nose. Tarns noticed and frowned. "You need a winter coat, Bilbo. No spell will keep you warm forever." Bilbo blushed. "I didn't think winter outside the Shire would be so sharp. I should have packed gloves." "Can you do that enchantment again?" he asked Tarns, sheepish. Tarns nodded, and a pale sigil flickered in his palm. "I can warm you, but only for a time. You'll still need proper clothing." "Wait, there's a coat!" shouted Beaufort from ahead. He rode up, carrying a dark green fleece-lined coat, and handed it to Bilbo. With Tarns's help, he pulled it on over his saddle. The warm weight made him sigh in relief. "That's much better. Thank you, Beaufort." Beaufort grinned and pointed behind him. Not mine, I didn't bring a spare. Thank Thorin. He saw you had no winter coat and gave you one of his. He said, we can't have our master burglar collapsing from the cold. Bilbo looked down and saw the Durin crest embroidered on the cuffs. He glanced at Thorin, who watched him calmly, and lifted a hand in thanks. Tarns shook his head with amusement. It seems your leader cares for the burglar he hired. Does he not, Gandalf? I never doubted Thorin's kindness, Gandalf replied, but it would be better if he would heed counsel and go to Rivendell. At that moment, a commotion rose at the front. Someone's coming fast, Thorin called out. Tarns squinted ahead. An odd sight approached on the road. A somewhat stooped old man sitting in a sled, hauled along by a team of enormous wild rabbits. When the old man saw them, he altered his course and came straight for the company, steering the sled with surprising speed. Tarns instinctively reached for his weapon, but Gandalf's voice rose above the hubbub. Stand down. That is my old friend, Radagast the Brown. The company fell quiet. Gandalf beckoned to Tarns. Come meet him. I'm not sure why he's left his woods to come this far, but I will introduce you all. Chapter 80. How to Convince a Stubborn Dwarf. Gandalf! Gandalf! It's me, Radagast! From a distance, a figure in a brown robe and a battered felt hat called out toward Tarns and his company. The voice was old, but carried a youthful strain of urgency. Tarns's group and Thorin's company halted. Gandalf seized the chance to ride forward to meet him. Bernal pulled his horse up a few paces, watching the newcomer with interest. That old man, he murmured to Tarns, like Gandalf, looks ancient, but isn't weak at all. Tarns nodded. I noticed. Why bring it up now? Bernal shrugged. It's just odd. There are still so many powerful people in the world, and some of them, Gandalf and that Radagast, seem to hide their strength. Or perhaps they hold back. I don't know why. Like those orc riders we met at David Village, Gandalf alone could have dealt with them easily. Maybe there are reasons we don't see, Tarns replied. I felt Gandalf restrain himself before. He even warned me not to use glintstone magic too fiercely. It's pointless to guess here. We should ask him privately later. I intend to, Bernal said. There's much in this world we don't yet understand. As someone who fights tarnished, you must appreciate how important intelligence is. Knowing your enemy lets you craft tactics. Tarns's face flickered at the mention of Sir Gideon Ofnir. Bernal saw it too and fell silent, then covered his face and muttered, No, this isn't about intelligence. He's just too talkative. Bilbo, watching the exchange, peered between them. What are you two whispering about? Tarns smiled faintly. An old friend. You may meet him one day. Bilbo pouted. All right. Gandalf, already speaking with Radagast, called Tarns over. Radagast the Brown, let me introduce you to a new wizard, Tarns. Tarns reined in Torridi and stepped up to the rabbit-drawn sled. Radagast looked the very image of woodland neglect. Hair, eyebrows, and beard all tangled together, smears of something white caked on one side of his head, clothes ragged and dust-streaked. As Tarns drew near, he caught the sharp tang of bird droppings. He suppressed a grimace. Gandalf, noticing Tarns's look, only cleared his throat and smiled. Radagast, this is Tarnes, rebuilder of Minhiriath, lord of the Twin Golden Tree. Oh, you're the one who fell from the sky. Radagast chirped, extending a grubby hand. He then abruptly lunged toward Gandalf in a burst of words, agitated and breathless. Gandalf stepped back half a pace, fetched his pipe, wiped the mouthpiece, lit it, and offered it to Radagast. Take a puff, old friend. This is good tobacco from the Shire. Radagast laughed, tried to speak, frowned, and then suddenly fished a stick insect from his mouth and set it in his palm, as if that explained everything. Tarns started to ask what was the matter, but Gandalf held up a hand to forestall him. He watched Radagast take a long, satisfied draught from the pipe, the wizard visibly relaxed, eyes softening. Are all wizards like this? Tarns whispered to Gandalf. Gandalf scowled, half amused. No, only he. Saruman the White is proper enough. The two blue wizards, well, little news of them reaches us. They went far to the east and south. Once Radagast settled, Gandalf gave a sign that he could speak plainly. Radagast said at once, Mirkwood is ill, Gandalf. He glanced over the heads of the dwarves, pulled on Gandalf's sleeve, and steered the two of them away from where Thorin and his company listened. Radagast gripped Tarns's arm guard and led them to a spot the dwarves couldn't overhear. Some darkness blankets Mirkwood, he whispered. Nothing grows, at least nothing good. The air is corrupted and foul, and there are those terrible webs. Webs, Gandalf frowned. What do you mean? Spiders, Gandalf, huge spiders. Radagast's tone rushed out fast. I'm certain they're of Ungoliant's brood, descendants of Ungoliant herself, or I'm no wizard. The name made Tarns uncomfortable. Gandalf's brows knotted, and he took another hurried drag on his pipe without even wiping the mouthpiece first. Tarns asked quietly, Ungoliant, what is that name? Radagast's voice dropped. A monstrous spider. Born in shadow, I think, a fell thing, perhaps a dark spirit given form. So their presence means only one thing, Gandalf said, dark smoke curling from his lips. Darkness. Radagast nodded, nearly peckish with agitation. I tracked those spiders right to Dol Guldur. Gandalf started. Dol Guldur? That fortress has been empty for ages. No, Radagast's face went solemn and frightened. Not empty. I slipped inside and felt a power there, as old as fear itself. A sorcerer, a necromancer, cloaked in deep darkness. The moment he spoke or called my name, dread filled me. I fled and have been looking for you ever since. Gandalf put a hand on Radagast's shoulder. Calm yourself. Are you sure it is a necromancer? Radagast unwrapped a hasty bundle from his robe and revealed a sword wrapped in plant fiber and sealed with enchantment. He handed it to Gandalf, solemn. Tarns felt an instinctive unease at the sight. This gives me a bad feeling, he said quietly. It does not seem like a weapon of the living. A normal person would be harmed merely by touching it. Radagast's eyes shone with agreement. It's not of the living. Gandalf unwrapped the sword. It was plain in shape, the blade blackened and pitted as if hauled from a grave. The hilt was dark as pitch, and for a moment both Tarns and Gandalf heard a cold, fierce cry that seemed to come from the metal itself. Tarns drew a holy sigil in his palm. Its golden light flared. Gandalf quickly closed the bundle and rewrapped the sword. Tarns, this blade cannot withstand your power, he said. You cannot purify it. I must take it to Rivendell. Elrond should see it. Tarns glanced toward the dwarves waiting for them, especially Thorin, and said, We should tell Thorin we must postpone to go to Rivendell. Gandalf groaned inwardly. Radagast, relieved, climbed back into his rabbit sled. Gandalf asked, You're leaving now? Not coming to Rivendell? Radagast shook his head. Rivendell is lovely, but Mirkwood's creatures await me. Without me, the animals there would suffer if those spiders return. Farewell, Gandalf. The rabbits kicked. The sled leapt off as swiftly as it had arrived. Tarnas watched him go. Your colleague's temperament is unique. Gandalf only called him eccentric and tucked the sword away. Back with the company, Tarns and Gandalf urged Thorin to accept a detour to Rivendell. As Tarns had expected, Thorin at first refused, demonstrating that characteristic dwarven stubbornness to its fullest. Gandalf bristled. Tarns felt the hairs of his beard stand at attention with frustration. He considered leaving the dwarves and going to Rivendell alone. Thorin refused to be swayed. He even offered to hand the frozen shell axe back to Tarns rather than detour. The dwarf leader would not be persuaded. Words bounced off him. Meanwhile, their journey had grown dangerous. Though the weather eased, orc attacks resumed. Orcs mounted on wargs harried them day and night. Their numbers were small, 7 or 8 at a time, too few to force Tarns' direct intervention. The dwarves handled them easily. Thorin scoured a fallen warg and pondered aloud, axe in hand. What do they hope to gain? Do they think these small raids will wear us down? Tarns adjusted the soul collector at his side and replied, They're delaying us, Thorin. These constant attacks have slowed our pace. What used to be a day's march now takes 3. He looked at Bilbo, who had dark circles under his eyes. Bilbo's nearly at his limit. The orc's nightly harassment hasn't let him rest. Thorin was silent, then said, So you want me to go to Rivendell? Yes, Tarns said, for Bilbo's sake, and to shake off these tales. The elves of Rivendell are not the same as the elves of Mirkwood. The elves who betrayed you were from Mirkwood. Elrond has no part in that. And if the orcs are so determined to slow you, it means they want something to do with the Lonely Mountain. The more they strive for something, the more we must guard against it. A shout came from behind. Oh, Bilbo! Watch out! Beaufort's voice was followed by the thud of 2 bodies. Fili called. Bilbo's fallen. He's weak and must have fainted from the cold and exhaustion. Beaufort caught him, so he's not hurt, but... Thorin leaned forward. But what? Feely swallowed. He's running a high fever. We have no medicine. If he stays out in this wind. Tarnis did not wait for his warning to finish. Prayers don't cure fevers. I'll go check on him before things get worse. Then, unexpectedly, Thorin's voice, soft and firm, cut through. Go to Rivendell. Tarnis started and turned. Thorin, with his back to them, spoke in a low, somewhat impatient whisper. You said the elves of Rivendell had nothing to do with the treachery in Mirkwood. I cannot have our burglar die out here. If word gets out that Thorin Oakenshield's company lost a member through neglect, it will stain my name forever. He gave one final instruction to Feely, check on Bilbo, and then said no more. Within 2 days, guided by clearer purpose, Tarns and the company reached the borders of Rivendell. Thorin's stubbornness had not vanished, but responsibility and the fear of reputation had won out when Bilbo's life appeared at stake. If Radagast's warning and the increasingly brazen orc harassment signaled something amiss at the Lonely Mountain, a pause to consult Elrond was prudent. Thorin might be obstinate, but he was not foolish. He could weigh costs and benefits when pressed. Note, this chapter is about 5,000 characters. I still owe you readers roughly 1,000.